Hi, I'm Heath Firestone with CinemaTechnica, and today I'm here with one of my favorite people to talk to about films, David Capps. We're
Hello.
going to be discussing another aspect of the creator because after he watched my first video on it and then watched the movie and then watched the second one, we had a great conversation and we had very different views on the film. And
Yes, to say the least.
thought, why don't we try recording some of that? So we'll see
Okay.
where it goes.
Yeah, it should
So,
go some interesting places.
yeah, where do you want to start, Dave?
I think we should start at the beginning, because that's a good place to start. And the beginning has a sequence I actually loved that has nothing else to do with the rest of the movie, but it has that old-timey, like showing in the past what people thought robots would be. And I just like that little short sequence in the credits before it actually got into it. And
Which I love
then,
too. You
yeah,
know.
and then, I mean, it's got, I don't know, there's certain parts of the movie that I at least thought very much mirror other movies. I think when it goes to the part after, well, okay, first of all, huge spoiler alert. If you have not seen this movie, you do not want to watch this video because it'll be massive spoilers because we're going to be going into everything, not just like, yeah, impressions of the movie, but actual deep dive into certain parts of it, which will either ruin the movie for you if you haven't seen it yet, or yeah, you'll just not be, yeah, you should watch the movie first before watching this. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
But part of that is like right at the beginning when it switches to the explanation after the nuclear bomb goes off in LA and it goes to the general that's standing in front of, and I'm kind of curious who he's standing in front of. I'm assuming Congress because it's not the UN because this is a fight between America and,
I mean,
but it's,
this takes place in 2060,
and
so
it
who
feels a
knows
lot
what the
more, yeah, it
actual.
feels a lot more like the UN than it does. Like lighting everything makes it seem like a bigger deal than, yeah, and it could just be the Congress, but he's in front of somebody and the general gets up there and it reminded me a lot of like Starship Troopers, of that kind of vibe. So, because just the way they had the general, yeah, coming up. But that is neither here nor there.
So
But that brings up a lot of problems I had with just the whole
so
world
well,
building.
that's the first time you realize that the aesthetic of this is kind of not what you necessarily expect. I mentioned
Yeah.
this in the other video. I told my son this is gonna look great. It was amazing. We shot on the FX3, which is a $4,000 camera. At least most of it was. And I'm like, but it still looks amazing because I'd
Oh, no,
seen a bunch of footage from it. But
yes.
then they're showing this really grainy. You can actually see the vertical lines, the resolution, everything. And this is, if 30, 40, 50 years in the future, and their video looks absolutely
Well,
grainy and terrible. But it's kind of trying to look
yeah, for like
archival
an aesthetic,
almost.
it works. It works. Like I didn't have any problems with that. And also there's lots of weird things that they do with that. I mean, in terms of like it's in the future, but all of the music, almost all of the music in the movie is old. Not just old, but I mean old by our standards. It's ancient by our standards. They have a ton of stuff that's like 1960s, 1970s at the latest. They're using, almost like, commercial music, things that you would almost hear like just as advertising Colgate or something back in the 40s, which is a weird choice. But I mean, even in the middle of, East Asia, where they're supposed to be this whole country, like when you turn on the radio, it's playing like 1950s American music, which is weird and not something you would expect.
But
Yeah,
again,
which
it's
which would be
aesthetic
fine.
choices because
Which would be fine. Yeah.
when they find a
Yeah.
car, the truck that they drive off on, it's an old, I don't know if it's like a international or something like
Yeah, it's definitely a big like
some.
F-150 type size, but older looking than anything
Of
now.
course,
Like 1970 still has, it
it's
looks
got
like
tech inside,
still,
but
yeah, it has
it's
tech inside, but it still looks like it has a steel construction and it's
oh, yeah.
not a modern look at all, which I actually like because I like older looking trucks than now. So I mean, I was fine with that, and that actually didn't bother me. There's lots of things in the film that pulled me out. That one didn't. I'm
No,
just like,
I
okay,
thought it was cool.
yeah, and well, and that's a classic sci-fi trope from everything. There's always that you want to mix high technology with this dilapidated like thing. I mean, Star Wars did that, and everybody else has done that. They do
Yeah,
that in animes all the time. They do that in video games all the time, and it works really well. So I didn't have a problem with that. That didn't pull me out. And to be honest, before I start into, because I'm going to go after a lot of things in this film, I do have to say that I did really, really like the visuals. Like visually, it is amazing. If you're thinking about watching the movie, for some reason you're still watching this and you haven't seen the movie yet, you should still see the movie just because it is beautiful. It is. And I was mentioning Star Wars, and the reason I mentioned Star Wars is that one of the problems I have, especially with the later Star Wars, is that its reliance on effects, and especially computer effects, makes it hard for you to get into it. Like you feel
yeah,
yourself being pulled out of the storyline, being pulled out of the movie because you're noticing the effects.
yeah.
And this movie feels not in terms of like it doesn't have the impact of the original Star Wars. But in terms of how the effects hit you, it feels like the original Star Wars. And of course, the original Star Wars was all real. I mean, obviously, they don't have Death Stars, but they're using an actual prop Death Star, a model, and they're filming that. So it is real. You're actually watching something. And this film had that same effect on me, that blew my mind, because I have not seen that for a while.
When we talk about the simulants, for example,
Yeah,
they actually used real live action characters in these parts, not done up as simulants, but as regular people, and then added the effects of the holes in their heads and that sort of thing in post. And they did a good job of making it blend. But they also avoided the uncanny valley that you get if you actually try to do a digital face or anything like that.
Yes,
and
which
so
never works. Hasn't worked at all in any movie.
So it's a cool choice to do it that way. And they wanted the simulants to be as human as possible in the facial expressions. I think so that you're relating more to them, and ultimately, if you're assuming that the simulants are a higher end version of the AI than the robots you see out throughout. However, there are soldiers and stuff like that,
and it really makes you wonder. I mean, and that's a whole nother thing to get into, and we definitely will. But that whole, like, the hierarchy of this world doesn't make sense. That's one of the problems I have with it, is that when you bring to the simulants, I mean, we talked about a lot of this. That was part of the conversation that you were referring to earlier. And I know, like, that part, the uncanny valley, and what you're talking about is the effect we have on the viewer. But, like, part of, like, it's funny you bring up the uncanny valley. So why don't you explain the uncanny valley first?
I was going to say, I should probably clarify. Okay, so the uncanny valley, they first discovered this when they were dealing with robotics. They were trying to make robotics have more and more relatability of people, so they start to give them facial expressions, eyebrows, mouth, faces, and stuff like that, to give them more realism. And they noticed that the more realistic they made them, the more positively people reacted to them, up until a point. So basically, until they looked actually human, then suddenly it dropped off, like, majorly, where, like, they suddenly went from looking relatable and cute or cool or whatever to being really creepy. And there's a lot of theory as to what it is. And, some people say it's dead eyes, because they don't have it. They're missing the micro expressions. They're missing something that they look almost human, but not actually human.
Yeah, and I don't think you can narrow it down, because there's actually, there's a mental trauma you can get. Like, there's actually a mental, not a disability, but there's actually a mental condition that you can get that will make you not recognize your relatives. So it's like, kind of like you wake up and you think that they're pod people, because even though you're talking to them, it just doesn't register that that's really them. And I think that's the effect you get. And you can't, it's just that idea that something that looks human but feels like it's not. It doesn't, not like one specific thing. And that's
and it's probably a combination
so incredibly
of things we
creepy.
talked about.
It's actually much scarier because,
And so the challenge with robotics, and now especially when we start doing 3D animated faces and stuff, is getting to that point where you are so good that you pass on to the other side of the valley and then are positively received by people again. And so you actually, we have some movies that actually dip in and out of that uncanny valley. And Beowulf was a good one. There were certain scenes that looked good, and certain ones were like,
I gotta bet in, because this actually brings up a movie that's absolutely terrifying, but it's not supposed to be. And that's The Polar Express.
Yes.
Because the people move so weird in that movie. The way they move is so off that it is horrifying, because you're not looking,
and that's one of the best.
Absolutely,
that's one of the best
yes,
examples.
Horrifying.
It really is. But and so it's a challenge, and it's something that we still deal with today. And we've been doing 3D animated, realistic 3D animated films since Polar Express. So it's been a good length of time, and we still have that challenge. But when you shoot with actual real people and then replace parts of them, you don't have,
which is amazing. And if you haven't watched the first video, you need to watch the first video, because they go into a lot about how he used practical locations, which is amazing. And they really are stunning. When you're looking at the locations for the movie, there's things that they put in with computer graphics. They're supposed to be the modern buildings that are in their time, like it's 2065, I think. And it is seamless. When you look at that, you just accept it automatically, that that's a location, that's where it is, and that's what it looks like. And at no point in the movie does that change. Every single location, you just accept it. It looks real. It establishes the world. It's beautiful. I love that about this.
Yeah.
But to go back to the uncanny valley, the reason that this is a very important concept for the movie itself is because of the synths. You were talking about that. And one thing they did, which is very strange, is that all of the synths just have holes in their heads. Like the back part of their heads is actually just electronic, is actually robotic, but the rest of their bodies are pretty much human. And I'm sure.
I mean, their necks are also robotic.
And they drink and imbibe liquids and food, which then you're like, okay, so they have to have a functioning esophagus. There's something that processes food, or at least stores it until they dump it out. And then they themselves...
does that make sense? Because later on in the movie, you actually see where they're all asleep in sleep mode, or standby mode, or whatever, while they're plugged in and recharging. So do they really need sustenance that's coming from food, or are they...
To jump ahead, do you need on something as an AI, as a synth? If you had something that someone could just click on the side of your neck that would knock you out, would you keep that, or would you put something over that to prevent that as a thing? And then also, there's a part where I just got to get something out there. The Special Forces guy looks like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons. Like, that's what he looks like. Even facial expressions wise, when he smiles, you're just like... okay, like they're going to bring him home. He was strapped to the top of the car.
He did look familiar. I wasn't sure why.
But
now I know.
At one point, Allison Janney, who does an amazing job in this film, she's an amazing actress, but she turns to that guy. They're in the, I want to say helicopter, and there's a reason for that. But it's this hovercraft, this lift that they're bringing in. Well, actually, no, in this case, it's the police that has captured them. So it's whatever police transport they're on. They've got a policeman in front of them, and they want to knock him out. Oh, right. So this guy jumps over and does the classic, like, holy, and you're like, but later on, they're like, they has a switch on the side of his neck. Like, wouldn't it be much easier to just be like,
plus he's choking the guy out. And you have to wonder, could they actually be choked out? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and then once again, the main child, the star child in this film is supposed to, is a synth, which is the same as what this police officer was, and later on in the movie is exposed to an area with a complete lack of oxygen and is fine. So once again, doesn't need oxygen. How are you choking this guy out? Like, what's going on here? Yeah, and so, I mean, I guess that's really what this is about. That's what this conversation is about. To me, there was so many inconsistencies with the storyline and the world that it caused problems for me, and there really is, because each thing speaks to something larger in the world that they don't address and they don't explain. So once again, the uncanny valley, that it actually is an explanation for why their face would look human, but they would have something, a part of them that actually says robot, because you would avoid the uncanny valley. So that humans would want to build something like that in so that synths wouldn't creep them out.
Well, I think
but they could still find them aesthetically pleasing.
I think for them to build simulants, they wanted to have some sort of differentiation so that they couldn't technically pass as human. And there are a few instances where you actually see some that are trying to pass as human. It's rare, but it happens there. And there's a point at which technically Alfie, the little girl, has her head covered with a hat thing so that you can't see, because they're trying to sneak in and not be recognized.
But then
but I think there's a reason behind them not. They're trying to make sure that people know who's a Simonite.
That would make sense, except one of the problems with this world they've created, I guess we should go into that. I mean, if you've seen the movie, which you should have before watching this, but the thing is, they have, what is it? They call it East Asia or whatever. It's South Asia. What is the name
New
of
Asia, I think.
New Asia. So you have New Asia, and they're apparently good with AIs. Like, people like them. They don't have a problem with them. So you would think
they live with them. They interact.
Yeah, they live with them. They interact, and they treat them as equals, like friends and equals. Well, if you do that in a world like that, you would think that they would have brain casing. Like, you think that would be a natural thing, is that they would want to have something that you could, put over that to make themselves look more human, or at least to
keep from having to run. If it has,
from having to run like a towel through your head every once in a while to keep it
there's
from getting
rotating
dirty.
Parts in there. It does seem like that would be.
You think that would be a good thing, but. In the beginning of the movie, when she's like, when you have Sergeant Taylor, which is the main protagonist in the film for the most part. I mean, there's things
Joshua.
about him. Joshua. He's racist. I mean, but all Americans are against AI. If you wanted to, that would be the term. I mean, they're not. But I mean, that's the thing.
But there's a reason they are. I mean, okay.
Kind of.
If you've seen it, that supposedly, the AIs, blew up downtown. Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And if he has any reason to be upset, well, he lost his parents and his brother, and he lost an arm and a leg in the explosion,
So wait.
So
So him becoming a soldier cost him An arm and a leg. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes.
But we don't have a drum set, so without a snare drum, that doesn't really play
Dum-dum.
right. I'm sorry.
There you go.
But yeah, that whole thing at the beginning, there's lots of things. We've both seen it twice, by the way. The first time I watched it, there were things I missed. So Allison Janney sits down with Joseph and she describes what happened to, like, she's trying to like convince him to join them. Oh, actually, no, this is later. So she's with him and he's talking about his wife, the one he's lost. And he's talking
Maya.
about, yeah. And she sits down and talks about her sons. Well, one of the things she says, though, is that one of her sons was killed in a bar by an infiltrator, which absolutely implies that there are synths out there that are made to look human and that can pass as humans. And I think one of the failings of the film is not showing like an actual reaction, like showing why Americans hate AIs, or that they fundamentally do. Because you need that for it to make sense in the storyline. Because you would have to hate AIs to do what they're doing, because they're on like an extermination, a genocidal path.
But if you look at it as, they believe that the AI was trying to destroy, all humans. Of course, why would it only detonate one nuke when it could destroy? And there are questions about that, But if you do believe the AI's gone rogue, and they're going to do this, then it does give a reason for people to say, no, we're gonna ban this, never again.
Well, especially if you're already worried about it. I mean, there's historical parallels. You have Pearl Harbor, and then you have a tremendous amount of backlash against Japanese people to the point where they're treated different than Germans, even though, like, you can definitely argue that the Germans are far worse in World War II, but they're treated much better than Japanese people are. And Japanese people look different. They are different. Culturally, they're far different than us. And so you have that same kind of reaction.
Then European descended Americans,
and they attacked us. Whereas, like, we had definite reasons to go to war with Hitler, but he never attacked us on our own soil.
Right.
Whereas the Japanese did. And there's some historical parallels, but one of the things that the film doesn't show, and it needs to show, is this reaction of Americans going after AI. Because you're talking about LA. So you have this explosion. Yes, you've got LA, but it's America. By this point, you're talking like 50, 60 million AIs. So it's not just there. That means people in the streets just killing AIs, like people hunting them down all over. Like,
yeah, remember,
deal. That's
10 years has elapsed. We're coming at the very end of the war. So it's been going on. So that's a different aspect of it. And this is kind of, once again, I assume you've seen the film, this, that this is a make or break it for both sides. They finally finished Nomad, so now it's the chance for them to actually destroy the AI. But at the same time that they've created their ultimate weapon against AI, the AI has created a weapon that supposedly could take that away.
So I would just like to say that the American military in this movie is completely inept. Like, it is run by people who don't understand warfare, who don't understand anything. So at the very beginning of the film, when they go after him, they're apparently going after Nirmato, which is supposed to be the creator. So they come to the conclusion, you find out later, that the girl he's with is Nirmata. She has a tracking device on her. They know exactly where she is. All they have to do is nuke her. Game over. Movie over. They don't need to do anything. Now, they obviously show later on that they don't really care about Taylor or Joseph, which means that there's no reason for them not to just blow it up. And then there's, at one point, like when they show up, when the special forces guys show up and they're going after them, there's a point where he's running after his wife. And there's like 5 special forces guys that, rather than just shooting her, she's like 20 feet away, they restrain him. Which makes no sense, because he's utterly useless to their cause, and they obviously don't care about him. So why not, like, if she's your target, there's a bunch of ways they could take her out. They're nuking things randomly. Like, they obviously don't care, and then 2 seconds later they drop a nuke anyway. So it's like, why not just nuke her? Game over. Problem solved.
Okay, that's a valid point. and I'm not sure they have a good rebuttal for that particular point,
Well, it gets worse. It gets worse.
It gets worse.
Yeah, because talking about the American military, later on, they have him go to his friend for help. And his friend works in, like, okay, here it comes, an AI factory. He's like in charge of an AI factory. You're the American military. You're trying to kill a woman who's on a beach and spends most of her time banging her husband. But there's an AI factory. Like, if your whole purpose is to destroy AI, you would think that, like, the huge factory might be a prime target, that maybe that might not be something you just leave alone. And you're like, oh, well, they couldn't do that. But like, they have an unstoppable flying fortress that they can bomb anything, anytime. So like, and that gets into another problem of the cities themselves. Yeah.
I admit that I don't have a good reason why, now that Nomad is online, why they haven't nuked all this stuff. They have a whole bunch of missiles on here. They know where their targets are going to be. We know because later in the movie they start launching them on all these target bases.
Yeah.
I think maybe the reason that they're trying to say that they haven't is because I think they're afraid that this counter weapon will be used, and basically if it's able to disable all this stuff, then we could have blown all of our strategic weapons in Nomad, without having secured the thing that could counter it, I guess, could be the argument, I don't know.
And Nomad itself is a problem because Nomad is this gigantic space fortress, but you can see that thing coming. Like it's low tech to be able to be like, that thing's coming our direction. And yet everybody's always surprised. Like they're bombing the hell out of, these innocent people, but you're just like, well, why didn't they just move? Like that thing can, it can drop bombs, and it shows later on that they can travel quite some distance, but it's always just like directly overhead. And you're like, well, why wouldn't you just scatter to make it to where like bombing it doesn't make any sense anymore? Yeah. But they're always just standing there and there's like Nomads here. And you're like, how did you not see that thing that you can see from the ground for like 200 miles away, and it has blue lights coming down for no reason to target things for absolutely no reason? That kind of gives away the game. And yet everybody's just
make a loud noise.
Yeah. And you're just like, how are you just like, oh my gosh, Nomads here, like it's kind of like that scene in Austin Powers where the guy's standing in front of the, he's driving and the guy's standing in front of it for like 15 minutes before it hits him. That's kind of like what everybody does in this film with Nomad, just like Nomads here. And you're like, yeah, like it's been coming for at least hours, to where you're just like, and it's not like you can turn on a dime. It's it's got to be tasked to a certain direction, and it's just I don't know. And that's my problem. Like I said, the film looks beautiful. It looks amazing. There's things, even the blue lights looks amazing. Aesthetically, I love it. But like the explanation for it gets silly. Like you just can't explain it. It doesn't make sense. And I kind of wanted to go chronologically just because there is a whole dearth of things like this, to where you're curious why. Yeah, and they don't explain it. And I know the original cut was 5 hours long, but even then, like, you can't explain all of this away with more.
I think there are some explanations for some of the other elements. I'm gonna silence my phone. Should have thought of that beforehand. All right, so but no, and like I say, fairly early in the movie, there were definitely some questions brought up that I was like, and I was like, if I nitpick some of these things, I'm gonna have a hard time enjoying the film. So I decided to take this as, as fiction, as and kind of like the same way if you watch a superhero film or something else, it's almost like an alternate reality. It may take place in a version of our reality, but obviously in that version of our reality, there's superheroes. And that's kind of how I kind of took this too. Like, not all the same things necessarily apply, or I've got to let certain things go because they're going to take some liberties. And they're artistic liberties, which I've talked about before. And some of them are not for practical purposes, but they're for artistic things, or and like definitely not everything's explained, and they don't try to explain everything. Whoa. And but there is more explanation to some of the things
than you thought on the first watch.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think, to me, I actually enjoyed the movie probably more the second time, even though the second time I was actually looking to refute some of the things that we had talked about in our conversation. But also I wanted to understand the thing. I talked about it quite a bit, and I was like, I wonder if I remember this right, or I wonder what it's like watching it a second time through. Because the first time, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much that you're trying to take in. 50 years of future history, where everything's completely and totally changed, and just trying to absorb it. And it's also cut down really to a shorter format than is easy to tell the story in. So a lot of the scenes are chopped up, where my first time through, it felt like they cut out too much. The second time through, I didn't feel the same way, but maybe because I already understood what were flashbacks. Because sometimes in the first viewing, I didn't know that certain things were flashbacks, or I didn't recognize this person yet. And I'm like, oh, hey, that's his friend who we see later.
And knowing
that's
that
his
coming,
wife,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
knowing that coming, you're looking for explanations for things that you missed before, and it provides them. There were some
Right.
things like that, the same thing, and I have to confess, just straight up, I have to confess, I did enjoy it much more the second time, and I think that's because the problems that I saw with it, I already knew about them, and so I wasn't thinking about them.
Well,
And so,
and just
like I
like
said, I still like the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, you should see the movie because it is good.
maybe
But
twice.
yeah, but if you're looking for it to make sense, and I guess I've already said that, I had problems with the inconsistencies, but the biggest problem I think I have with this film, period, is that there are things in the movie that hint at broader themes that would actually be something that would be really cool to focus on or to bring into the film, and they just bypass them. And a lot of that, like you talk
Yeah.
about him having lost his arm and his leg, well, it's not that he lost them. It's that they have replacements, but the replacements are very interesting. In a world where you have AI that are fully robotic and you have synths that are fully robotic, you would assume that he would have just a cybernetic arm that's just attached to him, but he doesn't. He has something that he actually attaches, like you would
And he
with a
takes it
prosthetic
on and off
today.
when he goes to sleep at night. However,
Yes.
interestingly, when he's swimming,
He has a leg,
he
but
has a
not the
leg but
arm.
not the arm.
And you would think like the arm would be like, yeah, you can kick with your legs, but you still want to be able to, like, yeah, if
It's
you're
like,
paddling with one arm, wouldn't that spin you around? So just the physics of
why
that
wouldn't
are.
you have the arm
To be
on in
fair,
that
all he does
situation?
is fall in and look like haunted, so he doesn't actually try swimming. So maybe that's why he leaves the arm off. But the reason to me that this is interesting is because
That
once
makes more
again,
sense to you.
absolutely. Like you totally deck yourself out differently if you're going to just look haunted and, go underwater and brood if you're going to actually swim.
I mean, clearly some of these were because they want to show, hey, this is
Well,
a
and a lot of
cybernetic
this
arm. It does come off, and it gives you.
and part of this also has to do, like, there's the press release was talking about how, they were talking about wounded soldiers and how that was important. And so for me, I think more of what they were aiming for is to look more like a modern prosthetic that we have today to kind of show off that, like, soldiers have to deal with that. Like, this actually happens to soldiers, where if you have something that's permanent, it's too easy to overlook the fact that he lost it. Whereas if he's pulling it off and on, it really heightens the fact that this man lost an arm.
Right.
And to him, it wasn't war, it was the bombing of Los Angeles. But the thing that this kind of hinted at to me, and we were talking about this earlier, is that if they hate AI, if humans hate AI, if they're worried about that, if AI scares them, then something that would have been interesting is the idea that AI would have the ability to hack easier than them. So having something that's not integrated into your nervous system would be much more advantageous if you're in a world where you're afraid that AI can hack anything. Like, they could use that body part as a way to actually hack into you or cause problems for you if it's integrated into your actual nervous system. And that would be a good explanation for why they're still strapping it on. They have the main general in the film wears eyeglasses. Once again, in this robotic world, no one would need to have eyeglasses. So they could have gone on this whole idea that you had this really high-tech society based on not integrating things and not having AI and actually staying away from any kind of technology that would be hackable in a way that would cause problems.
So, and that's an interesting point, because if you think about it, so one of the first scenes where flashbacks that we see where he's meeting Maya, and I didn't realize it was Maya until later. She's helping fit him or adjust his robotic arm,
Well, actually, like,
and so
yeah,
this is like, and later on we see a cut where before he's actually met her when they're observing her with his friend that we see later on who works in the robotics factory or whatever, but but this is all before everything, and he sees her from a distance, and basically he's supposed to integrate himself into this whole thing, go undercover, but not fall in love with her. And of course he does fall in love with her and he marries her, but yeah, she is working on his arm, and you find out later that she knows all about AI, that, and we'll get more into that later. But yeah, it's interesting. Now I do want to talk briefly before we go on to everything about the problems, because to me, like we got a lot of comments in our other videos, and some of the comments that people had were that I think they basically indicated they didn't like aspects of. There were some people saying they didn't like the acting, or they thought the second act was slow, which to me means they didn't connect with the main actor, because your second act is generally, okay, so your first act, you set up the story, your second act is where the meat of it is. It's usually about twice as long as the first and third act, and it's where you get to know the characters, you get their backstory and development. It's where a lot of your character arc happens. And so if people say that the second act is long, it means they're probably not connecting with the main character. And he's
Or with the storyline in general.
yeah,
Like, it's
with
not
Ferland.
keeping them.
True,
Yeah.
true. But people who say at the end, am I emotionally dead because I didn't feel anything? At the very end when you're supposed to be feeling, sentimental or having an emotional response to, Alfie and Joshua ultimately being separated. And I think it is, I think pretty much everybody probably connects with Alfie to some extent. You're supposed to. She's cute. She's adorable. You stop seeing her as an AI, or he does anyway, and you probably do too, and just as a little girl. And but if you're not feeling that emotional thing, it's probably because you never really connected well with Joshua, and that may be why people think that the acting wasn't good. I thought the acting
Now
was
let me
good
state,
personally.
I have problems, and I can go off on why you don't connect with, and I will actually go off on why you don't connect with them, but it's not the actor's fault. He does a great job, but the problem for me is there's this lack of dialogue. They have lots of points in the film where they're traveling places, they're doing things, but no one's talking to each other. And even between him and Alfie, there's almost no conversation, which makes it really hard to understand anything between them. And that's kind of problematic. And the lines they do have are kind of rough. So I mean, the little girl does this amazing job. Like, she's a great actress. Like, she's actually crying in scenes, and she's doing this great thing showing emotion, but there's not enough to actually for you to get to know her or what's going on. I mean, you don't have him asking why she's watching cartoons when he comes in. Like, if it's an AI, I mean, there's lots of things that as a viewer, the first thing you see is you have these questions, and he's just like,
Well,
this thing's a toaster, and you're like, but even if you think it's fake, then you're just like, why is this fake thing watching cartoons? That makes it even more of an issue.
And
like,
the character,
what's going on?
the character's a more, Joshua is a more reserved character, and John David Washington is also a kind of an understated actor, which he's not real effusive. But
that's true.
But that doesn't mean he's not a great actor. In fact,
No, like I
it's
said,
probably harder to.
I think he did a great job. I just don't think he had enough lines. I don't think there was enough telling you who he was. It's one thing to show what's happened to someone, but it's quite another thing to actually show them interacting with people, to show bits and pieces of it. And like, it's almost a broken record with him. Like, when they do show him interacting with people, it's usually them saying something along the lines of, this is what I think's going on, this is what's going on, and him immediately just being like, I want to find my wife. And you're just like, okay.
I mean, he definitely has, but at least it's consistent. At the very beginning, well, seriously, his motivation doesn't change really until the end.
record skipping. Like, no, at least it's consistent.
Okay, so no, but in the very beginning, he doesn't want to help. I mean, here's somebody who's obviously a hero. He's been through a lot. He's given up more than anything. He went. No. If you think about it, he lost his family first place. He still goes and fights for our country. He's embedded. He's almost about to find Nirmata. And at that final moment when he's just closing in on it, they come in. They kill his wife and unborn child. Undead child. That's a different movie.
Whole different movie. Like, this is the part of the movie. If you miss that in the movie, then you missed it, because there's
Unborn
the
child.
undead child is amazing.
Okay, unborn child. Okay, so
Missed opportunity for the movie. Nirmata also has the Necronomicon, people. This is
and he gets blown up again. So
it's true. That's true. He gets blown up a lot. A lot of it is him standing with explosions. They have one where the little girl.
Try to avoid it.
The little girl just stands there and she's fine, and he's like blown away off.
He sees the thing drop. He doesn't go for cover. He's like, crap.
And even once he is heroic. I mean, yes, he is a hero, but I don't know if his motivations are heroic. I mean, like, if your parents were killed by something, it's not heroic to be like, I'm going to fight for my country. He's fighting for revenge. Yeah, it's not. That's not. I mean, someone doing revenge can be heroic, but that's not a heroic motivation by any means. Like, that's not improving the world. That's just straight. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. But but he has given up now. Not only his his wife. He wasn't supposed to marry her and fall in love, but regardless, he does lose them. And so when they come to him, he doesn't want to get involved. For him, he's just doing his job. He's living out what life he has left, but he's not really living. He doesn't care. He's just.
Well, yeah, but at the same time,
surviving, and
like
he doesn't want to get involved anymore.
if you marry the daughter of the guy you're supposed to kill, like that's got to dawn on you that that's going to be a problem at
Yes,
some
it's
point.
going to be a
And it's like
problem.
he didn't have a plan on that. He was just like all of a sudden like, wait a second, they're trying to kill this guy. Like they're trying to. I feel like yeah, your whole point was there to kill her father. Like at
Well,
some point you're either going to betray her or understand that you're never going to be with her, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, she's
like,
going to have a problem
yeah.
when you kill her dad.
So I think so a lot of that, yeah, so a lot of that is also, I mean, and you can say that he's just delusional because he is in love with her, and he also has this very deep, like, obviously hatred for AIs because of what happened, and that his brain is just trying to ice this over. People do that all the time. That's okay.
I think he started connecting with...
I don't have a problem with that.
I think in a way he started connecting with the AI, you know? I mean, you know, the one AI played by Ken Watanabe, you know, calls him brother. You know, even later when he sees him, he knows he's betrayed him. You know, he still calls him brother. You know, there's still that connection. But that's an interesting thing about the where we kind of get into what's really unusual about, at least I think it's unusual how the AI is portrayed in this, because I mean maybe it's a trope. I don't know. I haven't watched enough AIs to know. But to me, throughout this entire thing, the AI isn't necessarily developed in, I say, how it would necessarily practically evolve where it's going to be better in all these other ways. It almost seems like the AI is designed to mimic humans as much as possible, and there's a lot of you know, anthropomorphism going on here, where they're trying to, and here's an interesting thing that I noticed even more the second time through, is you see little religious references throughout, you know, but not like they're trying to okay, so it's in the name, the creator. So Namada is the creator who created the AI. It's who they worship as a god, basically, you know. And in this,
well, kind of, yeah.
No, it says that. It says that in the definition.
No, it says that in the definition, but in the movie you don't really get that.
Right, you're right.
It's a completely different feel. Yeah,
you're right. But there is a reference at one point to Alfie being the savior.
Yes.
And when you start reading, when he starts reading what her name is, they refer to her as Omega. They refer to her as Alpha O, the American general did. But when he's reading her name, he reads Alpha Omega, and you know, Alpha Omega in the beginning and end. That's the reference to, you know, God. So from the
Abrahamic
Bible.
God, yes.
So yes, exactly.
Well, and the reason I specify the Abrahamic God is because they also have like a Buddhist temple where the robots themselves, the AIs, are actually synths. I think all of the monks were synths, but all of these monks are synths, and they very much it's not they're not there as like window dressing. It's not them trying to convince the Americans that this is a Buddhist temple, when you actually get the feel that they actually are Buddhists and that they believe that. And
well,
so,
even in the temple,
so, I mean, so it's not just. So I said Abrahamic just to specify that, like, there are multiple religious tropes in this movie. Like
the beings in this Buddhist temple are, you know, robots and AIs, which means they're
even the statues.
It's like they're trying to recreate their own version of American religions and beliefs and that sort of thing. Not American, sorry, human.
Yeah, human religious beliefs.
You know what I mean.
You know, they all, there's McDonald's, they're out there, they're eating burgers, they're into American
Sorry,
religions.
I didn't mean that all Americans are
no,
Abrahamic religions.
Totally understand.
I just meant human.
The vast majority, like when you think about America, if you were to ask what religion do you think about when you think American, you're not going to be like Buddhism. You're not wrong. Like
there's a greater percentage of people who you know, follow.
Well, and that also is an interesting thing, that they are leaning heavy into the Abrahamic religions when it is Asia. You know, I mean, like.
Right, but then they do have ones that are not. You know,
but once again, this brings up a whole nother thing. There's another layer to this movie. Whoever was doing, I think it is the director that was doing this, but also the cinematographer. Everybody, of course, was backing his play on this. Is that they were trying to do a lot with, like, I guess you could say, with imagery from Vietnam. Like, so that was something that's definitely at the very beginning when they're coming in. Even the noise. So you have this really futuristic craft, but it's making noise like a Huey, like a 1960s Huey. You hear those fan blades, and that's not something you'd really expect from a machine like that. But obviously, you know, it comes in, it swoops in, it lands just like they did in Vietnam. They all come hopping out the side. They're going to literally a small Asian village. The people there wearing coolies. They're wearing, you know, it really is just that. Like they have an underground base, and the underground base, that's a thing straight from Vietnam. They built underground because
Right.
they could get bombed. And
Well,
so
and
all of that makes sense. But when you lean into that, so my problem, once again, is you don't know if they really meant for the Buddhists to have a religion, or if someone's just like trying to make that Vietnam tie-in. You have, you know, the Buddhists would do things like sit down in the middle of the street, light themselves on fire. You have at one point they approach the soldiers when they're jumping out towards the end when they attack that Buddhist area. They walk up and just pray and they shoot them. So then the problem becomes like, is this something where they're actually thinking of their world and their storyline, or are they just thinking of the image and trying to tie it into Vietnam? And the problem is you don't really know.
I mean, you know, I think that most of the decisions were purposeful and actually had thought behind them. I don't think they were just thrown out, you know, as a.
Well, that would still be
I mean,
purposeful. It's
but
just
certainly there
purposeful
was.
for the visuals versus purposeful for the storyline are two different things.
I think.
Like going for an aesthetic is one thing, but like actually saying that it's motivated by the story are two different things. So.
Well, yeah, and so some of these things we may never know, you know, with this. But I did notice that a lot of the questions I had as I started to delve into watching the second time actually were answered in the flashbacks. I just missed it the first time because it didn't have a frame of reference for me until I had
actually...
a greater understanding of the entire thing. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, that kind of makes sense now, you know, in its own way. So I think that to me, it seemed like there's a lot more deliberateness to a lot of the choices than I thought on a single viewing.
Well, my problem with the whole Vietnam trope, of course, is that you have this one view of AIs and robots living in these tiny villages. And you've also got the problem of like, why are robots living in tiny rice paddy villages?
And
like,
why haven't they evolved,
yeah,
you know, in 50 years?
Yeah,
right,
what's the economy? Like what
why do
are
they still live
what
in,
are they getting out of it?
metal shacks and stuff? Yeah.
Like one problem with using actual people and then turning them into robots later is you have robots that are like overweight and walking like an overweight person would, and you're like, what's the benefit to a robot? Are they trying to be human? But what would be the benefit to limiting your own mobility?
Yeah, why are they missing teeth and that sort of thing?
Yeah, why are they? Yeah, like there's certain things you gotta wonder, why are they doing this? And then you also have, well, okay, to jump ahead, I mean, we're going to skip around a lot here, but one of the biggest problems with the world building in this is you have New Asia. They're supposed to be at war with the United States, yet New Asia has fully intact, fully functional, fully like brand new, not damaged at all cities that have obviously millions of people in them. That's where the robot factory is, that aren't touched. And you're just like, at no point do you see a New Asian military. They have like a terrorist force, but they don't have, and it makes no sense. Their policemen they have this huge network of police officers that have tons of AI and tons of weapons and high-tech gear, but yet they're fighting a war, but the war, they're leaving it to a ragtag bunch of nobodies with no equipment or support. And that just doesn't make any sense. If you're the Americans, you're going to bomb the hell out of cities because that's literally what we do. Like that's what happens.
Well,
and when you're after AI, we would be a lot more indiscriminate because you wouldn't be able to hit an area where you're just going to hit the AI. So
I think there was an actual explanation for some of that. They said we're not at war with the Asian people. We're at war with the AI, and so they may be trying to be very careful not to have a lot of
casualties. But I mean, but at that point you can't split hairs. Like if someone came to America and be like, yeah, but I mean, if you're coming to America and you attack us and you're like, no, we only want Rhode Island. The rest of you guys are okay. We're still going to send our entire military out to fight you. There's not going to be, we're going to go onto a full war footing. And at no point do you get the idea that that's happening.
What they're trying to attack is the AI strongholds. So they're trying to take out the command centers of these
AI factory. Is that not a stronghold?
Yes, okay. But I think if a lot of the stuff is being controlled, the resistance from the AI is from these particular things. If you can attack those specifically, then you may not have to take out everything. You just need to, take out the command structure and then go in and.
But once again, if you have a military and you're New Asia and you're at war with the United States, which you would be, because no country's going to let you just kill some of their civilians and just be like, oh, you only want them. Well, we're cool with that. Just as long as you leave us alone. That's not how anybody reacts, which means they're going to be trying to fight back, which means you're not going to have police showing up to a raid of, maybe at first, but after that, you're going to, at no point do you see a military presence or even the idea that there possibly could be one, which is really strange.
There's some questions.
Well, it gets a little worse when you think of the fact that Nirmata herself. So something that they bring up in the movie, and they use quite a lot, is Allison Janney just saying hack everything, which I think is hilarious because it's just like you guys are going to you're facing AIs, and it just seems to them like they can just hack AIs, and you're like, wouldn't they AIs? I mean, they're AIs. You think that they would be better at developing defenses against the group of people that don't have them. And then she's just like, she keeps on saying accurate, which I love. But the other thing she does is numerous occasions, just talking like, I mean, treating this like it's just normal technology for them. She downloads the brains, like the actual personalities and things from humans and puts them into synths. Well, the problem with this is that brings up something into a world like that in itself changes the world absolutely. Like
it does. I mean,
we're Americans, and I could tell you without a doubt, with the way our society is structured, there is no way that the elites in America are not downloading themselves into AIs to live forever. There's no way that people are not doing this, which means Nirmata wouldn't just be a terrorist or a leader somewhere. She'd be the most valuable person on the entire planet. And everybody would be looking to become immortal and wanting her to be able to develop the technology, which means that if you're New Asia, she's not just literally left alone to meet some guy in a bar and fall in love and then sit on the beach. Like, she would be the most protected asset of any country. She herself is more valuable than anything in the movie. There's no way you're leaving her alone.
The transfer consciousness thing definitely presents some challenges, and they imply that it can only last for a certain amount of time, depending how long they've been dead for when they transfer it. And when she pulls out the machine, somebody gets upset and says, basically like, "Oh, you're playing God" or whatever, with this machine. So it's definitely a controversial machine, but it's being used particularly
for Americans. But if you're in New Asia, like. Yeah. What's to stop people from doing it? Okay, so just in our own society worldwide, people are augmenting themselves all the time. Like, people love to change how they look, what they can do. So you're living in a world where all of that's possible. And yet, one of the downsides to the movie is you never see this. Even in New Asia, you're not seeing people with extra arms or any kind of change, which if you live in New Asia and you're okay with AI and you have all these capabilities, people would be doing that. They would be experimenting. They would be changing themselves.
When I first saw the trailers, I assumed that a lot of the people were augmented people, and then there were simulants, and then there was, robots. But you're right. You have robots, you have simulants, and doesn't seem to be a big number. Well, I mean, a lot of people seem to have artificial limbs or whatever. I think some of the soldiers have artificial limbs.
If you were in New Asia, you would, healthcare would be great for you, because anything that happened, they would just be like, we can replace this, like anything. Which is great.
There's a lot of things that, I can't really explain but like I say, if I'm also just taking it as just a story and not worrying about.
And which you were able to do, which I couldn't, because the second I'm looking at this, I'm like, there's no military. And also, if you're facing AIs, like AIs even now, like we use them for military capabilities to do things like control drones, to be able to move things around. Like, if you actually have people that are AIs, then they would be utilizing that in a war, absolutely. Like, you would use your strengths, you'd use your capabilities, and you would see things like robots that are actually built for war and not just like...
So let's address a couple of those things on that. So I've talked about this in the other videos a little bit, but we've got the trash can bomb robots, whatever they're called. And when they send one off to go blow up people, it turns to Colonel whatever Allison Janney's character and says
Colonel Allison Janney.
Yeah, there we go. And it says it's been a pleasure serving you. Yeah. And then it runs off, and you're like, and Jess has already before, but you're like, oh wait, do they have personalities, or is that just programmed? Then the next one comes up and it does not say that. It just says,
it just goes
affirmative or whatever. Order confirmed, and it takes off and goes. And you're like, okay, so they're different. So this isn't. So do they have personalities? Do they have AI?
Yeah, but this is
we know they have to have some level of AI. It just doesn't necessarily mean that they have a level of sentience.
This is especially troubling because it's a bomb. So bombs blow up. Like, what other purpose? Like, when they're not using it as a bomb before this point, because you can only use it once. So before this point, was it like a cocktail waitress for the military, or like what's going on here?
Why give it a personality if it's going to?
At what point would it have to be with this colonel? Like, did they have an affair? Like, is this assorted like her in the trash can robot? Like, I would love that, but I mean,
it's been waiting its entire existence to say this one line, thinking about what it wants to say.
It doesn't make any sense. Like, it's a bomb. You can't have used it before. Like, how many times? Like, what, they go get it later and put it? Like, that's almost evil. Then they're just like, well, take this thing that's ancient, blow it up, put it back together, blow it up again. To the point that it's just like, this is great. It's been a pleasure serving you. But then it wouldn't say that because it's implying it's not coming back. So it's just like, so once again, like, they do things in the film that they think are interesting or they're supposed to be funny or adds the character to it, but it actually destroys their world. Like, it absolutely destroys it. And then you're just like,
it raises some questions
and you don't
hard
need to do that.
That's for sure.
I don't know if the people watching this, you might have seen Netflix's new show based on the anime One Piece. So if you watch that, or any anime for that matter, like any of the fun ones. I mean, there's ones like Ghost of the Shell, things like that are really trying to be serious. But like One Piece, you have all of these weird inconsistencies in its storyline itself. Like with the technology, they're in sailboats, but they also have electricity, which would never, those two things would never really mix. They have like some sort of robotics, and then, they use snails for communication.
Yeah.
Ridiculous, right?
And people have, there's magic too, because he has the stretchy arms.
Yeah, there's magic. So once they actually establish, though, in their world that these things exist, they stay with them. Like they stick with them, and they say this is our world, and they just stick with that narrative. There's nothing in there that actually goes against the own world that they've created. And that's kind of my problem. I don't have a problem with world building or saying that these things have developed in this way. I do have a problem when things in your own movie actually suggest that that's not actually the case. Or like you have things like that trash can robot that just flat out contradict the idea that they're against AI. Because if you hate AI, you're not going to give weapons intelligence. You just wouldn't. So you wouldn't have weapons
something
like that.
You may have noticed in the second viewing, and we all noticed in the first viewing too, but you may not have really given it much thought, is at the end, when they're up on Nomad, Alfie runs across the AI research thing, which exists on Nomad. So why you'd have a bunch of artificial intelligence simulants
that makes sense,
on this, on the one thing that could actually destroy them all. It's like, the military is not going to have these things. So obviously, they've got the holes in the head. So they're the same thing. They probably captured ones or bought ones or whatever that they can use to analyze. So that makes sense. And also, we find out that. So I was curious when they in the very beginning they get Joshua to go on this by saying that this 2 days old or whatever it was, or 2 weeks old, whatever it was, footage of his wife.
And it turns out his wife's
proves
everywhere.
She's alive. And I'm like, well, we see her everywhere. I'm like
later on,
but I'm like, so is it just another one of these ones there? But this time I watched it, and she's not just another simulant. You actually see her ear. You see her. So it looks human, and they say, and it's confirmed that she's human or organic or whatever. And so you're thinking. Now we find out later. At least Ken Watanabe's character says that. I think he's the one. Yeah, he says they want you to go after her because they're going to follow you to find her.
Yeah, so that they faked the image.
And I think they did fake it. And I think they faked it with an AI that they made up to look like a human, so they could get this shot they needed to convince him to go, because to convince him that she's still
well, they wouldn't need
alive.
to do that. I mean, it's 2065. Like, we're watching a movie that has amazing visuals. You can just make it.
That's true too. But we don't have any evidence that they actually have. Who knows? But it's something they certainly could have used one of those AIs for the purpose of
well, especially since they actually have ones with her face. So
yeah. I mean, of course, they also have Ken Watanabe's character, but they could have actually And if they had seen her 2 days ago and been in this, couldn't have they just targeted her and blown her up? Then why not? I mean, so. There are questions I don't have answers to.
To where they don't. There's lots of things, but also we got to address the fact that, like, at the end of the movie, Alfie is trying to get his mom back, and so she takes the stick of her mom's memory and puts it into this AI that looks like her mom, and she comes back. But I mean, just think about it, like. You've been dead for a while. You come back and all you see is this guy who last time you saw him, like, basically betrayed you. This is the last time you've seen him. And also, the world is exploding.
But I think the idea is the last memory she has is looking back at him. I think she has regret, leaving him.
Well, definitely. But it's
still just like, so it's not as simple as
like, Joshua, I love you, but you also be like, what the hell's going on? Like,
but it also it does take the story full circle, because he had said in the very beginning he would give anything for it's a one more minute.
But she never says, I would love to be destroyed, like my last few moments blowing up with the guy who betrayed me. So I mean, it's kind of like he gets what he wants, but she's kind of like, well, and then it brings up, once again, that whole idea of that transfer, of course, brings up, is that really the person, or is it just a copy of the person? Like, is she actually dead? And then you get
that's always the question of transfer consciousness. Does a consciousness actually transfer?
And it goes back to Star Trek. Like, if you beam somebody, is that just killing that person or reassembling? Because that's, I mean, there's nothing to actually transfer that person there. So you're just making clones of people over and over, murdering them thousands of times over and over again. And there would be no difference because you're taking them from the molecular level up. They wouldn't know any difference because you're copying their memories. But and
if there's a soul, does that soul get copied? But more importantly, all we know is our consciousness that travels with us. If we're recreated somewhere else, isn't it just new consciousness? Does our consciousness go away? Are
Or
we
is there
still in
something that
that
actually,
body?
yeah, is there something that
Would you
transfers with
know?
that? And you think that we're just geeking out here, but there's actually some more relevance to this in the fact that one of the things when they're trying to be deep in the movie, and this was part of the previews, and right away when I saw this, it actually made me worried about watching the movie, is when they have that whole thing where he's talking to Alfie, Joshua's talking to Alfie, and they keep on bringing up the idea of heaven,
Yeah,
which I think that's a poor decision in a movie like this, because once again, that whole idea of what we were just talking about is such a big idea. The
it
idea that
is.
you have AIs and that you have humans and you have AIs that completely be human, think for themselves, actually have the ability to better themselves, grow intellectually, change. When you get that, then you have to have that discussion. Or if you bring that up, then this becomes much more complicated than just a religion.
It
And they
does.
pop it in with just a few basic lines, and that almost makes it worse. That's why I said they should have stayed away from it, because you can do some of that same thing, but just saying, like, you have Alfie right away be like, but I'm not going to heaven because I'm a machine. But it's like, it's so basic that you're just like, this had to be something that people in the world are discussing. This has to be a much bigger deal. And
What is? And that's going to
yeah,
be
and
always the question.
just throwing it
Does
out there so simplistically, it's like, that's, even if it was just a little kid who was actually human saying, am I going to go to heaven? Like, even then, the conversation, you can't just have that as just a simple line in the movie. It's got
I
such huge
mean,
broad implications.
it is, and that's
It's
that's
kind
going to be
of,
one of the most
yeah, and
challenging
it's
things.
supposed to be one of the things that bonds them together, but it doesn't really accomplish that, and it's just kind of weird,
Well,
actually.
so one thing I definitely remember the first time through was at the very end when he says, because originally he says that I'm not, you have to be a good person to go to heaven. So he said that he's not going to heaven because he's not good. And yeah, she's like, well, we're same because
Yeah, but that
she's
brings,
not a person. But then at the very end, he says, it's okay. I'm going to heaven.
but
Which I know is because of you, which
no,
I
no, no,
thought
but
is
there's
interesting. But then
no,
he says,
yes, 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 thank you. That changed everything.
I'll meet you there.
Yes, which is a
Meaning he
big
believes
deal.
that she will be there too.
Which is a big deal, because if you don't do that, then it changes it from being this loving line to being like, you little bastard,
I,
I'm going to heaven.
I
You're
remember
going to blow up.
I remember you said that in our first conversation. But
And
I
yes,
thought it was
and
interesting
I caught
because
that in the second version too, like the second
he's
watching of the
I'll
film.
meet you there.
Yeah, which changes everything, which changes that line, which makes it work. But I still
But
think,
that is one of the questions you
yeah,
have,
yeah,
because the Maya, when she's talking to him in one of the flashbacks, she says that she after father was captured or killed or whatever, she went to an orphanage where they cared where AI cared for humans who didn't have parents anymore, and she said that one of the AIs, when the human girl that she was supposed to be watching over
yeah.
ended up dying, that
She's crying over it.
she cried over it and then she turned herself off. So she killed herself.
Yeah, she
She
actually
couldn't handle the
committed
grief.
suicide. Or she just flicked that little switch and anybody could come along and be
Could
like,
turn her back on,
and bring
right?
her back on. Yeah.
So I mean, and so yes, you're definitely delving into something.
Well,
There's no
and I
easy
mean,
answers
but
for.
there's ways to go. I mean, it brings up interesting questions, and that's, like I said, is a topic that you could geek on in for hours. But I mean, maybe you could always come up with something like, maybe the world isn't about like the human soul, because there's always scientists looking for that. They've never found any evidence that there's something there. That doesn't mean anything, but there is no evidence so far that such a thing exists. But at the same time, we don't understand our own brains. So like, once again, that doesn't really speak to anything. But it is something that shows that people, even scientifically, are always looking for that. Like that idea, is there some kind of continuation? Could that even happen? But I mean, we're just now understanding like the quantum level, we have the whole idea that, things change when we observe them. And so then the question is like, is it changing because we're observing it just because something is looking at it? Or is that because it's actual sentience? Like, do we have like an effect on the world around us just by being sentient life forms? The fact that we can actually think and understand the world, are we warping reality? And if that's true, then an AI would have that same capability. And is that what's actually happening? Like, we actually imprint ourselves on the universe by warping it to what we see and we view. And like, would that actually like kind of have a copy of who we are? Like, it's our actions, everything. Like, would something of you survive just by the fact that you can affect reality in that way? And would only a thinking creature be able to do that? And if that's true, if the world changes because we're the observers and the quantum level actually changes with us observing, why wouldn't an AI who's sentient and actually has that same understanding be able to do the same thing and affect the world in a spiritual way rather than just being a machine?
Which is maybe why they start creating their own version of a religion, because anything that's alive generally wants to try
It
to
wants to
find.
know that it's going on, or
Yeah,
that there's some kind of
or there's a
continuity,
purpose to this or something.
And this is something we skipped over earlier, but you were talking about the religion. At one point, there actually is a shot. It's very short. When they get to the first city, it's going through this city, showing different scenes from the city. And one of those is a funeral for an AI.
Yes.
Which is interesting because, well, not for an AI. I mean, it is an AI, but to specify, it's not a synth. It's one of the robotic
robots,
AI.
And there's both simulants and
and humans. I mean,
not
there's
humans.
people.
Well, maybe humans.
Yeah, there's people.
But there's the simulants, robots,
there's people all around, all participating in.
I think that's to show that they really are integrated. People care, and they believe that there's more to this. I mean, that's one of the things that identifies something as a higher level thinking being is when they start burying their dead and that sort of thing. When we look back at ancient cultures.
But once again, you end up with the problem that if you're a robot, like, there's no reason that dying would be a possibility. Like, if you're still intact and the memory's there, then there's no reason you shouldn't be able to continue or fix that. So then it brings up the problem. Like, do they believe that if that turns off for a certain amount of time, that the consciousness of what that person was is dead, even though you could reboot it? Or
right, there's lots of questions.
It does,
with
but the
regard
thing
to
is,
that, and that's
like I said, these are really big things to tackle, but they don't make sense unless you delve into them. And it's like there's lots of points in the movie where they could have actually done more to show how these societies interact, and they didn't. And so,
but I said I said this is a thinking film, and not everybody agrees with me. But to me, it does make you think.
Well, it's thought provoking, but it doesn't necessarily address any of that itself.
But there's no simple answers to these. But if you're getting people to think about these, which any futuristic AI movie probably should get you to think somewhat about what that really means and stuff, what life is, when does something deserve rights and that sort of thing, and then also what happens to this thing that we care about. We care about our animals, and when our animal dies, you want to think that your animal
it's going to the farm up north. That your parents always tell you about. Yes, exactly.
But but something you want to believe that they why would we have souls and can go to heaven if they can't, this thing I care about. And so there's so you certainly want to believe they have souls as well. So how does that work when we have things like actually free thinking, sentient personality?
And we give personality to everything as humans. There's people that'll name their cars, they'll actually interact. I mean, we do that all the time as humans.
We ask more a lot of
we do that all the time. So it's like, of course, like an AI, something that's close to you could easily fall in love with. I mean, of course, they never go into sex robots and stuff, but I mean, come on, people, like this world.
Let's not go down that.
No, but I mean, that's what I mean. Like, there's implications, and they're simple, and like that's a stupid side product, but still there are implications. Like when people first develop AIs, like they talk about they'd be enslaved. They actually have a robot talking about that at one point, and of course they would be, because we're always looking at ways to make our own lives better and easier. And even the AIs would then probably want to make robots themselves that would take over their jobs. You know what I mean? Like, this is a normal progression of thinking creatures. So you're trying to make your life easier. So then you would try to make something dumber than you that's not sentient to do the jobs if you're an AI, because you still don't want to do that. Like, you might, And so
it's complicated.
Now I got to go back to something, because we went over this. I barely touched on it, but okay. So they have this scene where they're doing the whole Vietnam thing, and it very much, I mean, it's an allusion to that with the underground base. They have the horrible soldiers, which these guys are not really believable as soldiers. They seem like a little too like
gung-ho,
crazy militia guys that don't actually have any training and don't know what they're doing, and they're all like freaking out on the villagers, and they're just saying stupid things, which, like, once again, this makes sense in Vietnam because you have a bunch of draftees that don't want to be there. They're faced with horrible situations. That behavior would make sense, but with a crack elite unit, it doesn't make any sense. But one guy's talking about shooting the girl's puppy, and you're just like, these are god-awful people. I don't care if any of them die now. The second you put a gun to a dog, like, I don't care. So at that point, I was like, the soldiers, you're supposed to feel an impact for them. But I mean, really, who cares? They put a gun to a dog's head.
Like,
let these people die.
But that's not kind of jerks anyway.
Well, but I mean, they're not really believable as soldiers for the most part. Shipley, the guy that's supposed to be, they keep on showing him like he's a leader because they talk Shipley's doing this, but he does not have any skills. He's not somebody I would put like in charge of a burger stand.
And he's way too emotional.
Way too emotional, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. But the thing I'm getting to is you have this underground facility. Now, just think to yourselves, you have a super secret underground facility that's building new AI technology. What would you get to protect it? If your answer was mall cops, you would be correct. Because when they get to that scene, the only security this place has, there's no warning signs that someone's opened the door or breached the facility. There is, in fact, sitting right in front of the laboratory watching everything, 2 mall cops, 2 normal security guards with normal, normal TVs in front of them. They're not closed circuit TVs, and they're watching them. To the point, these guys are such ace security guards, such ace protection, that when the scientists are being shot. What happens is the guy looks at the TV first, sees them getting shot, then stands up and just stands there and looks. And it's not like he gets shot immediately. There's seconds go by. So you have these two, like, basically Paul Blarts sitting there watching scientists get killed, and their reaction is just like, huh, that's not normal.
That's
like
happening.
almost like we gotta call corporate and see what we're supposed to do because they're. I mean, and you're just like, this makes no sense. So once again, you have this weird thing where in New Asia, like they're at war, but
they were caught off guard.
But nobody's like set up in a position to fight or to defend themselves. Like you have villages unprotected; they can come and go as they want. They drop tanks in the middle of cities, and
I love how they're watching this stuff on these small, kind of
small, like old school. It's closed circus television. Like this is 1980s guys sitting, like this is the Nakatomi Plaza security guards before they get shot. And you're just sitting there like they're AIs. Like you're telling me that the AIs aren't interconnected with their own like security systems to know when something's going on. And then at the same time, this is a much broader theme. This goes back to like they missed an opportunity to have the Americans have like lower, like high-tech versions, but things that obviously aren't integrated into networks because they'd be afraid that the AIs would just be able to hack them. They show people using walkie-talkies multiple times throughout the movie. The problem is then they also show the AIs and robots using walkie-talkies, and you're like, once again, this is basic functionality. If you're a robot, wouldn't you just be like, I'm gonna use basic cell phone technology from the 1990s and make that something I don't have to carry and touch because I'm a robot. Like, it's so much of that is just so much of that you're just like, these are robots, but they act human. They have all human frailties. And it's just like,
no, like I say, they're very much we're trying to make them as human as possible,
which you could do. Well, there's also
if you're trying to make us accept them as, I mean, and this is obviously playing with the ideas of racism, and making them more like humans makes it easier to make that case of the...
And before the bomb going off, like once again, a missed opportunity. Before you show the explosion in Los Angeles, you could actually show that AIs are making this leap, that they're trying to become a human. So they're actually limiting themselves in the same way that humans are limited to try to be more human. You could show that there was actually a reason for that before you get to the explosion, before you show, and that it becomes a much bigger deal throughout the film, because you're like, these people are literally trying to become us. And that makes it like, makes them feel for them more, even though I was totally like team AI right off, which normally I'm not. I'm scared to death of what the AI is going to do. But this movie, I was like right away, just like, I hope the AI win, because these guys are just, they're just poor dirt farmers, apparently. That's what AIs do. Like of course, you have the ability to expand yourself limitlessly because you can connect to anything electronic. And of course, you would be like, I'm going to live in a grass hut because
it does seem like,
in a place with no power, because you're like, I need power to live, but I should go out into the sticks where it's possible I might not get power, because
if you could afford a simulant, you probably wouldn't use that money to create something that's doing the exact same job that you could pay somebody, a tiny little wage, to go spray.
Well, and that's the thing, though. When they show these villages, they're not like they have people over them. It's classic villagers.
That's where it actually more reminds me of anime and stuff, where you kind of go into this alternate, universe and reality, and it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's cool and it's interesting, and it raises the other questions without having to...
If it stays consistent, that would be fine. Like if you just show that and you just accept that in the world, but they talk about how the AIs are a real threat, and it's like, they're not a threat. Like they're less of a threat than humans are, because, well, they can't do anything. Like...
So let's talk about another aspect.
Like, make the AI scary if you want that to be a dynamic, because then you can actually understand why Americans would be terrified of them. And like, there's no reason to be terrified of AI dirt farmers.
In the Tibetan temple at the very end, when he actually sees that, when Joshua finds out that his wife has been basically on life support, for the last 5 years, that she's been in a persistent vegetative state, a coma, he asks, why didn't you turn it off? And the simulant says, something like, and I don't remember the exact quote, but we simulants cannot harm humans, or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting, Well,
not harm humans, not harm humans. What he says is that it's impossible for them to kill her, not humans. Her. Are
you sure? I thought
sure, absolutely
okay.
sure. So
I wanted to watch it again, because
she's the creator. She's the creator. So the whole idea is, of course, if you're the creator, there'd be a fail-safe to where you can't kill the thing that made you. Like, that's standard. But if it was humans, that would be like, well, then these things are harmless, which makes the whole thing even worse, because
But okay, so I thought So I thought he said a human or something, but you. So I've heard both ways, and somebody else said the same thing.
Well, and it's
Then they
also
dismissed this person I was reading because I looked it up. They dismissed it like, well, they're at war with humans. What would be the point? But if it was, let's just follow this backwards. If he did say we simulants can't harm humans or can't kill humans, I started thinking, well, I wonder, what if that is true? And I started thinking back to the whole story, and I started thinking about how you said,
like you're trying to see if...
why were they such terrible shots? You think that they'd be...
but they're trying, at one point they're shooting the trash can robot and they can't hit that either. So they're
Okay.
just horrible shots. They're stormtroopers.
Okay, so...
And we haven't even touched. Thank you for being. I would have forgotten about the inaccuracies, but thank you.
Wait, no. Follow my train of thought. So I started thinking, do we ever actually see a simulant harming or killing a human? And I thought to the when they bust into the thing and they're beating the crap out of the soldier when Josh was still undercover, it was a robot that was beating the crap out of him.
Not a simulant.
Also, when they're on the bridge, they're all shooting, but they're missing stuff. And so that soldier who comes out, the one who you said looks like Harry from Harry Henderson.
Yeah, he's Harry. So let's just call him Harry.
When he's going
and
out,
he is literally Harry. I mean, it's a sexy beard. Don't get me wrong, but he's Harry from Harry and the Hendersons.
They're all shooting at him, and they keep missing. So who actually shoots him? Joshua. Twice. He shoots him in the leg, and then he kills him.
And he finally kills him. Yeah.
And so then I was like, well, what about the police officer simulant? He blows up the bomb. But he also sees that the only ones in there is the simulant and Alfie. Mm-hmm. And when he detonates it, then he waits for the robots to come in. They all are shooting at him and stuff like that. And Joshua kills all of them. And it's down to a couple ones plus the simulant. The simulant is actually shooting at him and they're close enough range. You should be able to shoot him. And of course, he gets shot and his head gets blown open. But it's like he never actually hits Joshua. And I'm like,
yeah.
If you weren't allowed to, let's say that there was something in the program like, yes, you can look human, but if we give you this capability, you're more advanced than these other robots, then you also can't harm humans. Let's say it was programmed into them. You wouldn't want the enemy to know that you couldn't do it. So you would still shoot at them and stuff, but you would have the robots do the dirty work. When the grenade is thrown inside the shed, it's thrown in by regular robots. So it seems like, and even when they're on the beach scene, and Ken Watanabe's character, has him captured and stuff, he motions to a robot to hit him in the back of the head and knock him out. I mean, like, when I started actually breaking it down, I'm not sure that we actually see a simulant actually harm a human in the entire thing.
Once again, I'm not sure. This is exactly what I'm talking about, though, is that, like, is that actually something they meant to do, or is it just accidental? It would be a great plot point that they could expand upon that would explain things and make it good, but you're doing that for them. That doesn't mean that that's anything they have.
I don't think that they necessarily want to reveal that to you, but I mean, I haven't gone back to see if there's any...
There's too much of it to where, like, we can bridge those gaps and we can come up with a better idea for what's going on, but they don't actually say any of that. So both of us are saying, like, storyline-wise, this would make more sense if they did this, or if this is true, but there's nothing actually in there, like, we're grasping straws. Could that be? Well, like, yeah, but there's lots of things that could be. It's just,
I don't know.
That kind of bums me out. But I like that. But, like,
I think it's interesting because there might be these Easter eggs that might actually be something.
I love the idea, but it all depends on whether we're getting that line right or not. Because if it's just her, then yeah. And then also,
but even so, maybe it is true because
also,
I can't think of a single example. And I would love it if somebody does know example. I do want to go back and watch it.
If you're AI and you're at war with a nation that's trying to exterminate you, you're gonna, like, find a way to easily reprogram that. Like, that's not...
Well, I don't know. I mean
hardwiring something like that.
I don't think they want to change that because they specifically say, he says, what do you think will happen if we win this war? He's like, nothing. We want to live at peace with humans. So maybe you wouldn't want to change that about yourself. You still have the robots do your dirty work.
I'm sorry, someone's shooting at me, I'm going to want to shoot them back. That's just how it is. Like, there's no, like, once again, like, it would be, how are the Americans losing this war? If, like, once again, they're like, we're almost on the cusp of losing. And that's another thing too. You're just like, how are you almost on the cusp of losing? Like, at no point did these people ever fight back in the film. Like, how are the Americans on the cusp of losing when they're literally not in danger at all through the entire movie? Not once, not point. Is there even an idea? Like, besides the explosion in LA, and besides that lady talking about an infiltrator once, at no point are you like, Americans are under threat from AIs. They just simply aren't. It's just like, so we're bombing the hell out of a country. Granted, that's an American thing to do, but at no point are you like, they're able to fight back. And they keep on talking about like, we're going to lose this war if we don't get this. Like, how? Like, what are they going to do? Like, if they blow up Nomad, what's going to change? Like, you won't have the scary sky thing that's over them, but are they going to attack you? Because they certainly are now. They show zero capabilities of having anything that actually goes over like 300 yards range. Not even that. Okay, so also known technology. They have these shoulder launchers that fire, hit you, and don't explode. And that's a thing that the AIs use. And Ken Watanabe kills her. Allison Janney, he kills her. He kills her. He kills her.
I was going to.
You were ready for me, but he kills her. He blows her up.
I was going no. Okay.
Boom, blowed up.
Technically,
pieces. No blood for some reason.
He does. Yeah. He does shoot her with the time delayed, thing on her back, and it does ultimately blow up and kill her. So. But that's kind of a gray area because he didn't actually just shoot her and blow her up, immediately.
So they have a workaround. So if they have delayed explosive bullets, all they have to do is believe that they're not the ones killing them, and they'll be okay. So
it's a bullet killing him.
All the simulant has to do is say, "I didn't kill him. The bullet did." And you know what? Problem solved. They can shoot as many humans as they want. And be like, if it wasn't for these darn bullets, these humans would be fine.
That is the one exception that I did, and I realized that I wasn't skipping over that one.
But now I want to see the movie a third time simply to watch and see if there is a point where simulants kill humans. But the other thing too is the simulants. We didn't bring this up, but there seems to be a racism within the AIs themselves. The simulants are always in control. There's
definitely a class system, and
which also is a problem because they're talking about how these people live with, AI and robotics, and they treat them as equals and they live with them. Well, like, then why would there be a hierarchy for the AIs? Like, they don't necessarily show that there's a different capability because there's not. Because even though you have these simulants, they have high-ranked commanders that are with them that are obviously
there's
robots.
A hierarchy even in that. It's like, well, are any of the robots? Do they make any of the decisions? But one of the ones with the moving mouthpieces and stuff, recommends that they do something. But he's definitely, talking to Ken Watanabe about, some of the decisions. So he seems to be a higher level robot than your police drones or whatever.
They show a robot high or drunk, one of the two, watching robot strippers, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like, that scene is amazing because it's showing that, like, these guys are relaxing the same way as normal, like you'd expect guys to do.
I say a lot of making them as human as possible.
But that one also is the one that sounds the alarm. It actually commands things. It's the one that commands people. So it's once again, the problem I have is that a lot of this stuff doesn't seem intentional. It's not that they're actually saying that that there actually is a hierarchy. That's just how they did it. Because
I think it is intentional, but I don't think that. But you can't go in and explain all these things either in 2 hours.
Well, yeah,
there's too much story.
The other problem, though, but you can hint at them, though, and that's the thing. They never do. Like, all of this is just left to you having to explain yourself because they just don't. You might not be able to do a full explanation, but you can show
hint at him. If he really did say they can't harm a human, which I thought that's what we said, or can't kill, whichever it is, then that would be a hint. Well, it would take multiple watchings to actually catch up on.
There's also a problem with your theory.
I'm sure.
Well, yeah, but I like it. Don't get me wrong, I like it. That's not a direction I was going. I love it. I want to see it, but there's also a problem, and this is a problem. So the guy who says that is also a Buddhist monk.
He is,
and that's the problem too. Is that a Buddhist monk?
But he doesn't say we monks. He said we simulants cannot.
Yeah, but how often do you do that? When people are like, so what are you going to do this weekend? You're like me. The Firestone family, we the Firestone. No one talks like that. You say we. You just say we. And that goes to whatever. You're not like we, meaning the human race.
If he said it right, which means if he said it that way, he probably said it for a reason.
Yeah, but that could be their group. Like, they're all Buddhist monks there. So it's like, yeah, like we're not going to kill her. And then at the same time, like, the New Asia has humans. It's not like if this is a horrible problem for you that she's alive. Like, you can bring in some random guy off the street, some bum, and just be like, dude, here's a Twinkie, hit that switch. He's going to do it. Problem solved.
I might be totally wrong, but if we watch this movie through again and we see no instances of them actually doing it,
but
then it probably means it was intentional. It just wasn't. It was an Easter egg. It's one of those things that you're supposed to maybe discover, or it's one of those hidden things that you don't tell as a storyteller outright, but It's
that
one
you're
of the
making
rules
that
that you're
flaw.
going by, because when you craft a story, you create a backstory, you create all these things, and most of those things don't actually end up on the
But once
screen,
again,
but they're still there. It's still
making that an Easter egg
informs
when it would
them.
actually explain why this is a one-sided war, why like the whole idea that, you know, the Americans are absolutely just shellacking these people, even though they should have capabilities far beyond your average human soldier, and the ability to hack equipment and to be able to do things. I mean, like electronic warfare is the new warfare, period. Like that is so much more dangerous than normal warfare in a lot of ways. Like AIs would be masters of that. So is that the danger? Because they never show the AIs being a danger
Well,
to Americans in any
and
way
maybe
at
the
any
AIs were
point. Like they can't
designed to
hit
be
anything. They can't. Yeah.
designed not to be superior to humans, because you don't want, because that's one of your
But
fail safes and stuff. Have
once
them be as
again,
close to humans and not
yeah,
have any of these
which is
things. And if you
fine.
did that and you program them so they also thought like humans, then they're going to want to fit in,
Well,
want to be
they are, but
accepted.
once you go
And
to war with a group of people, they're going to look like, how can I augment myself to fight back? And they're going to find ways around those barriers. They're AIs. They're going to find an
I mean,
answer. They're going to
but
cue
the
those
humans
off.
could
Yeah.
be augmenting themselves the same way, and they aren't.
No, but
In this
they
world.
have a fear of AI, where the AI have no reason, logical reason not
Only
to.
in the West. The
But
people in the East are not augmenting themselves to become
yeah,
super soldiers.
that's true. But like once again, that's something that would happen. Like humans do that already now. They try to do that
Right.
now. Like why would a world where they can do that freely?
Which is one of the challenges. But then
Yeah.
again, we also have to recognize that this is science fiction,
It's not science
and
fiction, it's fantasy.
okay,
That's the problem.
okay.
It's not science fiction
Well, I don't
because
know. Science fiction,
no, Star Wars is fantasy. This doesn't have any basis. There's at no point is there any like scientific thing to explain anything. They're not talking, like even when they talk to Nirmata, at no point does Nirmata actually say anything scientific about AIs or,
No.
I mean, even the AIs themselves aren't fleshed out for like their capabilities or what they do in any way in the entire movie. It's not sci-fi. And that's not,
okay,
I'm not
I
saying
guess
that,
it depends
I'm
on,
not
on
saying
how
that to
literal
denigrate
you
the film,
take.
but it's important. It's an important distinction because people, there's so many fantasy movies out there that
Okay, it
people
is
classify
fantasy.
as sci-fi.
It's futuristic.
Yeah, and you
Futuristic
can do
fantasy.
that. You
Okay,
can
I'll
do
give
that.
you that.
Futuristic sci-fi. But the whole point, like what science fiction really is the idea that you're trying to place this in a possible world using science. That's what science fiction is
Okay.
them trying to dream what would actually be a reality in the future. What could we actually do? And granted, it's almost impossible to actually make sci-fi now because technology is moving so fast that the world changes so much that trying to see, like the fact that he put his 2065 is problematic too, because what is the world going to look like in 2065? You think about that. You go back to the 60s and you look at the year 2000, for instance. Like, that's 40 years and that's a big deal. But with the digital age, like, things have accelerated. Technology's changing. We are changing.
I mean, we don't have flying cars yet.
We do, though,
I mean, but not
they're
like
not
Jetsons,
usable.
you know?
They're not. Yeah, but I mean, they're not usable. And the problem is us, though. It's not the technology. Like you can make, like people are using the same drone technology, which makes a lot more sense than normal flying cars.
Yeah.
But there's actually companies that have made cars that work. I mean, they do.
Yeah.
They fly. They have ranges that make sense. They can fly. A decent amount. So you could say you could commute with that. They're reliable. Like they do have flying cars, but you can't trust humans to pilot them. You can't trust humans to pilot normal cars. And that's just on a single plane. Like, yeah, I would rather have a computer controlling those, but there's no way you can let humans control it. Like becoming a pilot's a big deal. You have to go through tons of classes. You're not just going to be like, here, go. Like,
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
at the same time,
but we do have
piloting
that-
a drone
yeah.
is way easier than piloting a plane. Because,
Unless you're on it. I mean,
well, yeah, but I'm saying they
Yeah.
a lot of things that are challenging from flying
absolutely,
a plane
absolutely.
are not challenging from flying a drone
That's
because
true,
they
that's
automatically
true.
self-level and all these
No, that's
factors,
true.
so.
But humans are not going to be. You can't trust it. I mean, really, you have flying drones. I have a nephew. I love him to death, but he's 16. I'm not going to trust a 16-year-old with a flying car. And
Yeah,
they're
I mean,
gonna get there.
yeah,
But I mean, the point is, like, that's always, if we ever have flying cars, they're going to be controlled by AIs that are actually taking, because that's the only route you can have. Like, airspace works because not too many people are in it. When you actually have that kind of density, you would have to be. Like, they've already experienced that problem with just drones.
at least a lot of it would have to be automated
Yeah.
and stuff like
even,
that.
Even just drones delivering packages have a huge problem because there's already so much clutter in the world. I mean, and that's just a fraction of what would be flying with cars.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, at the same time, I mean, you right now we have clutter with vehicles that have to be on particular roads and stuff, and when you spread that into 360 degrees of motion, you actually have a lot less overall clutter.
There's
except
tons
for
of reasons to do it, just not tons of reasons to let humans be in control of it. or not in control directly.
Well,
Like,
at
yeah,
least
like
it
having
needs to
an
be
AI,
augmented by
yeah,
some
having
sort of
computers
automated
control that
system.
actually
Yeah.
makes so much more sense. Like, and I mean, it makes more sense even for cars
I
if you
mean,
don't know how to make
we're
cars.
getting it with
Yeah, they're
cars
already
with
doing that.
lane
But
departure and
that's the
stuff. And
only way I could ever see flying cars work is that. Like, I mean, you're not going to have a fifth element. People are controlling
I
them
mean,
just like
if you've ever
robots,
tried
but
flying a drone with or without object, avoidance, it's or with or without, automatic,
oh yes,
leveling
yeah, oh
and
yeah,
everything else,
it's a world of difference. World of
yeah.
difference.
And I've flown the ones that are completely manual, everything. They're tricky, I've flown ones that
And then some.
have auto leveling and tracking and all that, but do not have obstacle avoidance. And I can imagine obstacle avoidance would be extremely would make it so much easier. But so yes, that makes sense. I still would want to have some control. I still want
Oh yeah.
to drive my car.
No, I
Personally, but
agree. I
yeah.
agree. Like you want to have that option, but the thing is, you shouldn't have that option if that's the environment you're in, because you're, even though you want to be in control, like you're not going to be a good person to be in control. Like,
Well, you can be in
yeah,
control, but something else is making sure that you're avoiding obstacles and stuff.
yeah. But
So
even then, like once again, if people have the ability to deviate from the path, like you have too many vehicles flying, like you're going to have endless. Like quite frankly, the problem that humans can control cars is a problem. The population density, you just end up with endless accidents. So it doesn't matter. Like humans shouldn't be controlling cars. If we had the ability to do that, that'd be good. But I'm going to do something extremely low tech here. When I was last in the movie theater, I actually brought a notebook to try to write things down.
no,
Now there are those out there thinking like, hey, it's a dark movie theater. You won't be able to write. And you're right. Like I can barely read any of this. So I'm going to see if there's anything. Like the very top has something that says like work co. And I don't know what that was supposed to mean. So we're not going to go there. The next one says like loin snee. Don't know what that is. Okay. But
don't know if I want to know what that one
yeah,
is.
yeah, don't know about that. I think we've already covered most of this, but I'm just trying to see if there's anything that I wrote down that actually like goes against this.
Speaking of Weinstein,
No, no, but I did have, yeah, like it's so it pretty much covered most of what I was trying to get. So I apologize for that. But well, I couldn't use a phone. They tell you not to do that at the very beginning.
oh, I
I
know.
can't type on it. I'm not
Yeah,
going to be that guy. Thank you very much. Even to try to take notes.
yeah. Even if you turn the screen
Screen
all
way
the way
down, yeah,
down, it's still
it's still
glowing.
too
It's
bright. Now, granted,
distracting.
I was in the back, and the couple making out next to me probably didn't care, but still, I'm sure they liked the movie better than I did, though they don't remember any of it. But but I
No,
think
I enjoyed it. I was curious. I made the comment that I think this is going to be a classic, and I know a lot of people don't agree with that.
I
I
agree
think
with
it's going
it.
to be
I
rewatchable.
agree with it for different reasons. I think this is going to be the film, and you guys talked about this in the other two. So if you have not seen the previous episodes that he talks to Marc with about the creator, you have to watch that, because rather than being me here going off on the storyline and us talking about what could have been and what it might actually be hinting at and all of that, it's actually a lot more on the technical aspects, which is actually really interesting, because I think what's going to make this movie a classic is it is going to be that movie that proved that you can make a blockbuster movie on a limited budget, and the effects they have in this movie are much better than what you see in most Marvel films. When you see the previews, and I told you this the first time, they had the same previews. You have the preview for the new Aquaman on there, and just the effects in the movie for Aquaman, there's parts where you're like, okay, that looks cool, but I don't believe it. My brain doesn't believe it. So I can sit there and say, this is the world they're in, this is it, but the effect itself makes my brain know that that's completely fake. You don't have that problem in the creator. You just don't. You
Yeah,
don't. There's a few things.
you get involved.
Yeah, there's a few things. Well, it's not even just involved, and that's my whole point. Is this is what you need to understand about this movie? Is you're talking like I'm talking here, where the story didn't get me. I didn't just like fall completely into the story, and that took me along. So you're looking at someone who is already pulled out of the movie in a lot of points, and the effects aren't bothering me. And I'm looking at the effects as effects, knowing they're effects, and judging them because the storyline's not pushing me along the way I'd like it to, and I'm still not seeing problems with that. That's huge. That's not a small thing. And they did that on a limited budget. So there's a couple points where I'm looking at vehicles like they have in the city, where it's like the police vehicles, and I'm saying, okay, that's moving probably a little bit faster than you would have something like that actually. But I mean, it's very minor points. I'm looking at entire cityscapes that they've generated themselves, and they look amazing. The AI themselves, like I've been bashing this film a lot, but the truth is it is so, I mean, it looks so amazing that if anything I've said and you haven't watched the movie yet and you're saying like, oh, I'm not going to go see this has a lot of flaws, you should see the movie simply for that. The visuals are that amazing. It's worth going to see just to see how seamless all of that is, because it is truly amazing. Like when I walked away from it the first time, even when I had all these questions about things that hit me, that still blew my mind, just absolutely blew my mind. And I think I told you about that. You know, one of those things when you're watching anime, like, you know, this is me back in the 90s when I was first introduced to it. When you're watching anime, you're always thinking like, oh, what would happen if they could actually make a live action film that had this? And even when they've tried to do it, like you take like Ghost in the Shell, and they did a good job with that, even though the movie was absolute garbage because they changed the storyline once again for no reason. But even then, there's things that you're like, okay, those are effects there. But this is the first film I have ever seen where you're just thinking right away, it makes you think of all these possibilities, things that you think that you could do, or movies that you've seen before, or, you know, anime, anything that you thought of, like, oh, I wish they could make a movie that would do this right. And this movie showed you can do this right. And in the modern world with streaming, where you can't have gigantic budgets because the money's just not out there because it's split too much, that there still is a possibility of doing this. And if people start glamming on to how they shot this film, they start using the cost-saving message, which you talk about in the first 2 videos, which is why you should absolutely watch those, it could literally save cinema. And that's not me being like hyperbolic. Like, one of the things that scared me about what's happening with the streaming services and about how the money's being split in so many different ways, and there's all of these companies, and I mean, granted, Disney's still going to make crap films no matter what, like what technology they have, and they were the ones behind this, which is not to say anything bad about the film, but they were the ones that ponied up the money. So good for them for at least that. But what it shows is that even though that has happened, even though you have this diluted revenue stream to where they don't have the money they did for these types of things, that these movies could still be made. That people that want to dream big, that really do require those kinds of, you know, storytelling tools that you can only get from computer graphics, that's possible. And that you can not just do it, but do it better than the budgets for these films like Aquaman, that I guarantee you has 17 times the budget or something. And quite frankly, after watching The Creator, even though I have all these problems with it, I'd probably still watch it again. And
so here's where we diverged, I think, big time, is when I watched the film, I realized that certain things weren't gonna make sense straight up. But I was like, you know, that's okay. I'm along for the ride. I'm gonna just I know, and suspending disbelief, you know, but I'm gonna
Heath
go.
has one of those switches too, so
I'm gonna go along with this and assume that there's a reason behind all these things, and just enjoy the film for the film, you know. And it made a big difference because I wasn't getting caught up on the things that would kind of throw me off too much, you know. And you know, and that's why when I can go back through, I can say, what about this? And I don't even think we touched on a lot of the defenses I actually gave for it our first time through. But I actually
so if you could, go off on them.
I can't remember what they're all on right now. But well, you had specific things where and one of them was the, you know, why are they such terrible shots? Or I have filled in some of the reasons why.
And my explanation for this is I still believe it. Like, you are a filmmaker yourself. You are also a storyteller. You write. I think that you were just filling these things in your head as it goes along. Like, I still believe that. Like,
there is a certain element of that, but I also think that there's a lot more to this. I think there is a lot more undeveloped backstory.
Well, and you said there's 5 hours. Yeah, and like if it's just 5 hours of them not doing anything, then that doesn't make sense.
Like I say, so much you develop so much, and so much of it ends up, you know, never making the script, but you still have developed this reason why things ended up the way they are. And like I say, I'm filling in, you know, maybe it's because the AI is, you know,
maybe so.
Look like you are limited from being able to.
But then again, if you had a reason for this stuff and you didn't include it in this cut, like things to actually explain something, that's almost criminal, because it would have made the storyline so much better. You'd be able to suspend your disbelief because there'd be explanations for some of these things. Like the whole idea that, like, oh, the AIs can't hit them because that's an Easter egg. Well, like, why would you keep a huge plot point that actually explains your movie an Easter egg when that would be a really big dilemma that you could actually refer to about, like, the humans are super afraid of us. They're trying to kill us. They're murdering us, and we're physically incapable of fighting back, which means they're helpless, which changes the whole dynamic, because then Americans are slaughtering people that can't fight back, which we don't like to think that way. We like to think of ourselves as the good guys.
That they don't actually address until the end. Maybe they had a more expanded version of explaining that near the end, because it would then explain it there, but they're like, we have to cut this down. He does say it here. You know, the people get it will get it. You know, the people who don't, and that's, we know it. There is an explanation for these. I don't know.
But there's a litmus test. Like, you have to think on a certain level to enjoy this movie. It's like,
you have to.
I failed, but Heath is going to move, and I just slammed my mic. I apologize, but I failed. So Heath is moving on to the next level, to where when The Creator 2 comes out, he'll be allowed to watch it, and I will be ejected from the theater because I just didn't get it.
I'll be writing the next version. So.
But no,
the backstory, the one that
backstory.
explains
Well, I mean, but
all
that's
the
my
stuff
thing,
that,
and
that
I
you
guess
brought
that's
up.
well, I guess that's kind of my problem because, like I said, there's so many things that you hint at in the world they created that could have been amazing, like absolutely amazing. They could have been movies on their own. That fleshing that kind of world out and actually providing like explanations for some of this stuff is actually more interesting than what happens in the movie to me. And that's what kind of bugged me, is that you don't really have this character development that I wanted, but a lot of what happens there would, like a lot of these explanations we're talking about would help flesh out the characters. Like
Yeah, I
Joseph's
mean,
character, like this kind of world, like what world is he inhabiting would make you understand him more. Like what does he really have problems with AIs? Like, yeah, they blew up, but I mean, does that really make you hate all of them
well,
and then
you
you're going
know,
to
I
go on
mean,
like genocidal rage? Like,
and that's a good question, and
yeah.
it would be interesting to see more of his backstory or whatever.
Or
You
to
know,
actually show, like Batman, and
however, a
show
lot of
his
times,
parents dying, show him losing his arm and leg. Then you're like, oh, I'd be pissed too. Like,
a lot of the excitement you have about hearing the origin story of characters like, you know, Darth Vader, a lot of times are disappointments when you actually see it because,
well, yeah, the
you
prequels
know,
were garbage, but
you
that
know,
doesn't mean they had to be.
I was so looking forward to that because you want to know how did he turn from, you know, you know,
Yeah,
into
but I mean
Darth Vader and stuff, and
that's
then
a bad example because the writing for those
it's
films is
no,
horrible.
it's not a bad example. It's a good example because
Okay, it's a good example, bad
the
movie.
point I'm trying to make
Good.
is that there's so much potential for that.
Yes, absolutely.
But
No, I see what you're
sometimes
saying.
the
So
story we make up in our head
you're
is
saying that
better
you're
than
afraid. Yeah, you're saying that it would like that I'm putting too much like importance on this and it would actually be bad because they could never meet my expectations for what I want it to be.
yeah, your own I mean, and
I
like
mean,
say
I get that.
if a
I
movie
get
is art
that,
and if your
well,
interpretation
it is. Yeah,
of that
it is.
art
And this movie is
is
definitely art. I mean, I don't know if we covered that, but even with, like I said, the flaws we covered, it is beautiful. It's art. And a lot of it's, and I told you this before, like one of my problems was that when I was looking at this movie, I'm thinking that the people involved in this are able to make these amazing just scenes happen because they are artists and they're thinking visually. And I think that a lot of the problem for me, at least, is it kind of seems like the movie is them going from something that they think would look cool to something they would think would look cool,
see,
and then finding
I
something
think
to bridge those rather
I think
than
there's
being
art,
story.
art in the storytelling too, but I think there's a lot of uh, a lot left up to interpretation, you know, and like you're right, you know, I was able to fill in those in a way that I was satisfied with,
Yes,
and you
yeah,
weren't able to,
yeah.
and that's fine because we
Yeah,
focus on
yeah,
different elements.
things.
You
Yeah.
know, a lot of people didn't really connect with Joshua's character. I don't think I did. You know, I did find the
Well, I didn't have a
ending
problem.
emotional, and especially the second time
Yeah.
through, I realized because I thought it was a little bit sparse on the development of his character and also the development of the relationship between him and Alfie. But the second viewing through, I didn't feel that same way. I'm like, oh, there was more. It is there. There actually is a
there
fair
definitely are
amount
pieces,
of.
and I'll give you that. But one of the problems I had, like, I actually didn't have the problem of not being able to connect with Joseph. I did, like, but I think that's more just because of the trope of it. I mean, it's a pretty standard trope. Like, here you have a guy that's been damaged.
Yeah.
He's a soldier. Like, it's easy to just fill that in your head, like you said. I had no troubles connecting with Joshua. The problem I had was you don't have a lot of him connecting with other people or filling out any kind of personality traits with other people. Like,
No, he
I
doesn't.
connected with him.
But that's
Yeah.
part of his character too. He is kind of a loner and stuff, and that's why it's actually that's his arc is that he actually does make a connection with somebody, you know,
With
and
her.
with her.
Well, that's the thing,
in
though, is
particular,
that-
and you do see
Yeah.
that development. If
Well,
you look,
see a little
it's-
bit, but there could have been
it's
so
slow.
much more. Like
Okay,
at the
yeah, fair
beginning, you
enough.
have it to where she's basically, she doesn't know a lot of English. They established that. And she gets a hold of a translator and she holds onto the translator and literally just programs herself with the ability to
But
speak English.
she's also reading the Bible, interestingly. But then
Yeah.
later she asks
Yeah.
him, "What's heaven?" It's like, didn't you just read the Bible? But then again, does the Bible
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
define
I was
what
gonna
heaven
say,
is? 'Cause it
Like,
doesn't
no,
really
that
well.
doesn't, yeah. Like, if you read the Bible, you're not gonna, like, and you're, like,
Most of our what
Old
we've been
Testament
told
versus New Testament versus there's, yeah,
no,
we're not gonna
most
get
of what
into
we know
that,
about
but
heaven and
yeah.
hell is
Yeah.
actually comes from like, you know, Paradise Lost and
Yeah, there are things over it. So our versions of that are not something you get from the Bible, which is fine. So like that doesn't have a
yeah,
problem.
Dante and stuff. Yeah, so
Yeah. Like, once again, tangent we do not want to go down because
no,
that's
but
a million things
the
added in.
point is,
But
you know,
yeah, absolutely.
But now
the
I do have to
thing
say,
is-
it was hilarious when
Yeah.
when she says, "What's heaven?" He's like, "It's a peaceful place in the sky." She looks out the window, and looks up at
and looks at
Nomad.
Nomad,
It's like hilarious.
which is of
Like,
course,
yeah.
yeah. No, I mean that's important
not
because
heaven, I don't
she's
think.
looking at it as like that's not heaven at all.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
No, don't tell me Nomad's heaven because I'm not going
No,
down
no,
that route. No, just like
Well, you draw. No, I was trying to think of something. Something kind of ironic about that is when she asks him, when he asks her where his wife is, where Maya is, she says Don or whatever. I don't know what
Well,
it
and
was.
she ends up
And then
being,
later
yeah,
you find
they
out
both end
that
up being there.
that says, she's
Yeah.
in heaven, implying she's dead. But then again, she's also in a Tibetan monastery in the clouds,
Yeah,
which is a peaceful place in the clouds,
It is. It is. Yeah.
Also, her mother, when she finds her, is on Nomad, which
yeah.
she actually, well, not the
Well,
similar, the
that looks
transfer
like her mother,
which
'cause
is
it's
kind of
not her
interesting
mother.
to tie that
Yeah.
together. But there was a
Well, and
transfer of
once
consciousness
again-
potentially to that. So it's just kind of, I never really thought about that till just now, but it's
Yeah,
interesting.
that like they actually, and they're both in heaven when they blow up. But I
It's
mean,
in the
still, once
sky.
again, I'm sorry if I'm dying and you're gonna bring me back. Don't bring me up just to blow up. Like I'm gonna be disappointed in that. Like hey, there's the person I love. Like why? Like
Of course, the last
yeah,
thing
like,
she remembers is being blown up. So
So
you're making her go through it twice.
So you're like, it's normalized. Like, it's okay. Once you've been
She's
blown
been
up
through it
once.
once.
And the same for him. Like, Joseph gets
Exactly.
blown up at the beginning of the movie. Like, that's his whole backstory. So
he
he
gets
doesn't
blown
care.
up three
Yeah, like,
times in this movie.
he is comfortable in that environment. The rest of you might not like explosions. But
He
Joseph,
was
this
destined
is,
to die
this is
in
his bag,
explosion.
baby. Yeah, it's like explosions are his jam. He's okay. Just like
Third
both of
time's
them
the
are just
charm,
like,
right?
they're just kissing each other and it's like explosions. This is normal for us. Like, we need to change this, but hey, whatever. And she doesn't, the one thing that's kind of true, I mean, you could go into tons of things at the end, but she doesn't ask about Alfie or anything, which you think would be a standard thing for your daughter, which essentially it is their daughter. But I mean, that's kind of the thing that bummed me out though, is because you could have, once she learns English, you could have so much interaction, more interaction between Joseph and her, things that would actually be more of like a kid dealing with an adult, and him slowly turning to the fact that he's actually not only having feelings for her, but points where he's actually treating her more like a daughter. Like when you're a father, you know this because you are a dad.
But
like
he does.
Things,
But he
things that you
does.
change in your well, he does a little bit. But I mean, that's my point. You have these opportunities because there's definitely opportunities. They have huge swaths of this movie where no one's saying anything and no one's doing anything, and you're like, these are opportunities to
But
actually.
there's a lot more where it's shown in actions, and I think he's more of an action, more action, less talk.
He's a man of action.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
I don't have time for conversations, kid. Chucks his cigarette and explodes. I'm a man of action.
No, but when he goes out and saves her, he carries her, another time he got blown up. 4 times. On the bridge. Yeah, but he carries her, then he carries her, it's him who carries her to the to the temple and all this.
But at that point, still, yeah.
So he starts protecting her. He starts yelling after her. You can tell he starts seeing her as his daughter.
But at the same time,
he switches from I'm using you to I care about you.
Well, just devil's advocate, in those same situations, he still hasn't found his wife. He doesn't know where he is. There would still be motivation for him to do all of those exact same things if he didn't care at all about her, because
he stops calling her, little bot, little Sim, and he starts
Little
calling
Sim,
her
yeah.
Alfie. He called the bot, hey, little bot, whatever.
Well, okay, and then there is a point. There is a point where
Bot,
she says, like, she doesn't tell him her name, and there is a point where he refers to her as something else, and she's like, "I'm Alfie." Remember? It's just like, so you're telling me that this lady made this creature and puts her in this, endless loop of watching cartoons, and she didn't even give her own daughter a name. Like, that's another thing that you brought up that the movie doesn't really address.
So, and I think,
but still, like.
Yeah, we don't know how she's raised or anything. I mean,
and that's another thing. You bring up another problem, though, is that just like.
So is she only learning by watching TV? I mean, that's.
Well, and the cartoon,
an 80s trope too.
The anime that she's watching also includes Nomad, for instance, which is pretty cool. Like, it does include Nomad, so it's actually an anime in the world that they're happening. Yeah, okay. So the anime she watches on TV, because she turns it on later again when they get to that silo or whatever, and she turns on the TV herself by doing the whole which also, if you're an AI and you're built into it, like, would you actually have like a whole physical thing you had to do the thing that you're supposed to do? It's like, it's kind of low tech and silly, and also
how lame would it be if there wasn't some?
Well, you could do like her eyes wigging out or something to where she could twinkle her nose like Bewitched, but the classic.
That's much better than what they did.
But I mean, the point is that, like, once again, you have this idea that you have these AI, which is supposed to be super advanced tech, and yet most of the things that they do with it are extremely low tech, like what we would do. And like, they keep on talking about how she control machines, and at one point she stops a bomb, but she doesn't really stop it or reprogram or do anything. She's just basically like, stop. And throughout the entire film, the only power she has are essentially EMP pulses, which is not really all that impressive in a world with AI, because you'd be like
stopping EMP pulses too.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd just be like, you could, of course, like, just reprogram things, or like actually jump into it, like actually control things with her mind, because everything's tech and she's supposed to be AI. That would be a much more impressive thing and a much cooler trait for her to have. But she's essentially just like, I go boom and things turn off. But it's just like, That's not
So,
really like
with some of the
that's
development,
kind of a crappy weapon.
with some of the development of the character too, getting back to that real quick, is when they ask him to turn, basically to use the EMP pulse gun
And he
to shut
does.
him down. He does, but he doesn't. He whispered to her, stand by, not off, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's indication for her to stop it, because he cranked it all the way up. But then she obviously stops it. But that's another thing where he's showing this emotional thing to her.
Oh no, I agree. By that
and
point, yeah, by that point you obviously know. But I'm just saying, I was never saying that there isn't that kind of thing. It's just there could have been more that explains it.
And when the general says, it's not a funeral, he's like, it is to me. So
But at the same point,
this is part of that.
Yeah, but when
thing.
he
we
says
do see
that,
it. There's enough of it
no,
there.
I like I said, I still think there could be more because it would actually
there
add to
could
the
be
character.
more.
It could have been better. You could flesh out
and
her
there
character.
And there may have been that.
Yeah, you
that
could
is...
flesh out her character because for her, like, there's so many things you could have with her talking. Like she understands later on that this is basically her dad, and yet there's no moment where she's like, you could have had that. Like she could have even said goodbye, father, or something. And that has a lot more emotional impact than just like, I mean, there's missed opportunities. And I think, like I said, once again, I think you're glossing over things because you like the film, and that's fine. But I think you're literally just in your head, you're making this up like, oh no, he's a guy that doesn't say much. Well, it's like, no, because there literally wasn't lines on the page. Like, he's an actor, and if you don't give him anything to say, he's got nothing to say. And that's kind of what happened. Like, I loved her as a character. I mean, I liked the actress that played the little girl. She did an amazing job for Alfie, but they don't give her anything. Like, she has very little to work with. So she does an amazing job when she's in crying scenes and stuff, but it's like, you could have given her personality. You could have actually had this thing where she's part like this creature that's supposed to be like doing these things, but at the same time she's still an actual little girl, and show more of her like trying to interact. They show her playing with kids to where you still understand this as a child, but at the same time it's this child with capabilities who's also understanding things on a higher level. You can play with that kind of stuff in such amazing ways, right. And they just didn't, and that's a failing.
And I hope that I suspect that there was more of that,
Like in the 5 hours, there's like really long conversations between the two of them. You're
no,
like,
but I think there were more scenes developing that.
Yeah, probably,
if you are trying to chop it down to that, you're going to say which of these can we lose, and what do we still need to have to get there?
Which is still a failing in the writing, because if you wrote enough to do 5 hours of material, and that's like originally.
There's guaranteed there's enough content to do 5 hours because you're telling so much of the story. Just set up and everything else.
Exactly,
it's going to take huge.
But if you're not finding out a way, because I mean, what's that classic trope? You can have a complicated plot, or you can have complicated characters. Well, the thing with this movie is it's not really a complicated plot. It's not. No. It's pretty simple. But the characters are also very simple. They're not complicated either, and that's the problem. You don't really have either. Like, you can have a movie that's got a really like mind-bending plot, which this one could have, but it doesn't actually do that. It hints at it. I mean, you and I have expanded on things that make it mind-bending, but it didn't do that. I mean, really, like your whole thing with the robots, like the synths not being able to shoot humans, like, that's gold. I love it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I like that idea. I might be wrong. Well, even if you are wrong, though, that would be amazing. They didn't do that. Like, we did that, or you did that possibly. Like, they might not have done that themselves. But that goes for a lot of things.
I think it's there. I think it's there. But
I hope you're right, because that would add a dimension to the film. But the problem, once again, is that doesn't come across in the film. And that's a problem. No. Yeah, and if it's an Easter egg, that's great, but there's not enough of the film to hold together without it, to where that explains major plot holes that they need to have explained. And so if like when they were developing this story, you need to go back and look at the script that you're actually working with and be like, okay, does this have enough to actually show what we're trying to do? Does this tell the story we want to do? And if you have 5 hours and you have to cut that down, then when you originally wrote the script, then you have major flaws, because the script shouldn't be enough dialogue to shoot for 5 hours, because that would be insane, because you'd have a script that was like 10,000 pages long, which you would know you couldn't shoot.
You're right. When you were, just for those of you who aren't that familiar with how scripts are written, generally, if a script is properly formatted and properly written, 1 page of shooting script should equal 1 minute of film. So you should know pretty well, based on your script, if it's properly formatted, whether you're gonna go. I mean, it's gonna
and you probably want it to be lighter than that when it's something for like this, because you're going to add in the effects that are going to take a lot longer, that you're not going to describe fully on a page.
And you know that you're not going to be able to. That there's a lot of exposition you got to get through, and that you can't just do rolling credits at the beginning of the film that explains everything up to that point. But wait, you can't do that.
You can't. And it can work. It can work, but it doesn't always work. Like,
no, but generally,
Star Wars Spaceballs, like, you can do it, but
the trick generally is to figure out how to tell that story, through flashbacks, through doing exposition in ways that are interesting instead of boring. And I think they did do that, and they even said that there were sections that would take 20 minutes they've cut down to 2 or 3 minutes, and that's a challenge, but that's probably the best way to do it. But it might also have explained some of the stuff that you're having
Well, and it
issues
is,
with.
but then they should have taken more time to actually figure out. I mean, my problem, and I told you this before, and yes, granted, this is just me throwing out a line that sounds good rather than it being necessary. But I mean, I told you originally that I thought it was like 20 minutes of plot put over 2 hours. Like I was joking. I was like, I don't know how he managed to take a 20-minute story and turn it into 2 hours. And that was a joke. But at the same time, it's like, you can do this. Like you could have told that same storyline in 20 minutes, like as a short film, and you still would have had all of those plot points hit home because there's really not much there. You have him, he meets his daughter, he goes through, like, these are not big things. There's not a lot going into that. It's not complicated. You don't need 2 hours to tell that story, and yet they had 2 hours, and there's still all of these problems with it. I'm going to scoot over out of like swinging range here.
But there was enough in this film that, to me, it seems like if they cut any more, you wouldn't have had the whole story. So I don't know how you could possibly tell this same story.
They didn't need to cut more. They needed to add more into the dialogue and actually have some of that fleshed out. Like when he runs into his friend Drew, like literal robot factory. There's no like just, hey man, like I'm this racist guy who hates AI. Your entire life now is AI. You're obviously in a relationship with an AI, and he's essentially just like, hey. Like not he doesn't react like, oh, you're sleeping with the enemy. He reacts like, oh, you're with that nerdy girl, like, oh, you've gone outside of the clique.
But actually, it's actually more complex than this. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it, because his friend tells him, don't fall in love. He falls in love with the, one of the highest up terrorists.
Yeah,
the
highest up. We just don't know it's the highest up terrorist. Yeah.
So obviously he's integrated into this society.
Once again, I'd like to point again. Once again, not a terrorist. Just we want to call him terrorists because the film portrays the entire war like these guys are terrorists.
That's what he calls. That's what
that's what he calls it. That's what he calls it. But I mean, she's not a terrorist. Like none of them are. They're
I'm just
okay. You're just repeating
quoting or paraphrasing what he said. That's not my opinion.
I'm
just
You're
saying what he said.
No, you're right.
But Joshua did get integrated into society. He did fall in love. He married her, knowing all of these things. So there may not be as much of a hey, how could this possibly happen to you? Because it happened to him. And
true.
I mean, he does give him a look like when she says,
no,
and he even says something when he calls her babe. He's like, babe. Like,
yeah,
really?
but that would be the same thing if you're a friend and you go over and you think your friend's single and he's got somebody and you see them, because at first he runs into them in a work environment.
Yeah.
So then, she looks like his assistant or something, and then you go up. So the exact same dynamic would happen, because if you said babe and that was someone they work with, like, oh really? Like you're actually with this person. So it's like that's kind of true. So I agree with, I have to agree with you on that. And at that point, he's already bonded some with Alfie. So whatever he had with AIs is already kind of changed. And he knew that he was at that point sleeping with Nirmata. Well, before he even knew it was the daughter.
And he knew his friend was there. So he knew
he had interactions.
Progression. And it's been 5 years.
With Ken Watanabe and stuff, where these, obviously, even though he has these deep-seated hatreds, he's gotten over them to a certain extent, or at least to where there's some cognitive dissonance to him, to where he's made these things okay, even though...
That's where I think his character becomes more interesting, because he's not as black and white as you might think. Yes, he has this hatred, but he did.
No, I don't. Like I said,
and he doesn't want to go out and destroy the AI. He doesn't want to be involved anymore.
Not anymore.
His motivation at this point is to find his wife.
Well, okay, but once again, world's most advanced creator of AI. This is just me, but most advanced, because you were bringing up Joseph, and I don't. Like I said, I don't have a problem with Joseph. I had no problems empathizing with him because of all this, because they did flesh that out, but they didn't flesh out the rest of the world or his relationships, even with Alfie. They could have done more with that, or with his relationships with a lot of things. But they did do a good job with him. Like I said, granted, they got a really good actor, which helps a lot. Yeah. When you have someone who can be understated, but still portray those emotions and bring like humanity to this guy. And same with Alfie. Like, I think they carried a huge load. I think for me, those actors had to carry a huge load. But at the same time, you go back to the story problems. Like, he's supposed to hook up with this girl, not like he's supposed to get close to her, he says, which granted, that's like, you hear that in a movie, like you're supposed to get close. You automatically know that they're going to be in a relationship. That's just how life works in movies. But also, it just does. But then they put him into, a strip club, another strip club, and there's a girl that's like half bionic, which was one of the few times they really show augmentation. And he shows disgust because she's got bionic, which is funny because he also has bionic arms and limbs. But he shows that discussed that, like, oh, you actually want to be. She's the character that actually has the augments that are permanent, whereas he's American who doesn't, which once again, you can bring up the idea. But then you got to come down to, once again, the most important asset in the world, technologically speaking, is hanging out in a bar, a strip club. And that's just like her haunt. And you're like, this is not...
It's the watering hole. Come on. Come on.
Yes.
Hero's journey.
Yes.
It's a critical point.
It is for that, but it makes no sense with like the idea that they're at a war and they're gonna, like, once again, if this person was the person that created AI and, you know, was the daughter of someone created AI, they would be the most important person in the world, period. And if you're New Asia, that person would be in a military compound somewhere protected by so many soldiers. And then when you have, we didn't talk about this, but we talked about it in our previous conversation, is when Joseph takes the little girl, they just keep on showing like this person is abducted and no one seems to care or know who she is. And then they're all awed by the fact that they actually like talk to her. And then they realize that there's something different about her. But even the cops don't know who she is. And once again, like, she was in this underground facility. Who's controlling that facility? Why is there no, like, once again, no one's trying to actually treat her as something special when if you're in New Asia, besides Nirmata, she's the most valuable, most important thing, period. You're not going to have mall cops guarding her. You're not going to have a world where people don't know who she is. And you're certainly not going to have cops that go up and are like, we're going to stun her by pointing this thing literally 2 inches from her head to, like, you're just not, that's not a thing that's possible in their own story.
Not necessarily, not everybody necessarily knows that, they know that there's a savior. They know, but they don't necessarily know it's a little girl and stuff. But everybody does seem confused about the fact that, like, oh, they're making kids now.
Well,
like,
and
oh,
that's
it's a tech I've never seen before. And then we go,
that's
there's another story. But
like,
this is where we get into that, you really have to suspend your disbelief or to believe this is a different world where things, because she was, because I was like, how did she, because I was confused on timelines. I'm like, well, how did she develop this? Didn't she go into coma right afterwards? But they do say that she finished her like a couple weeks before this whole thing, and it was modeled after
the embryo of their daughter. So they were supposed to have a daughter,
and you actually see an image of her actually working on this, 8-month. Old embryo that has the
but that's the thing though. But that's the thing though. No, but that's the thing though. They say embryo, and when they switch to that, what I thought was interesting about that part is they say modeled after an embryo. That's not an embryo. That's not even a fetus. What they actually show her working on is many, many, many more times advanced. So what it implies, though, is that the baby she has growing inside her isn't advanced to the one she's working on. And they say that she can grow. So it implies that she didn't just build this AI. She built it at that state of like a newborn baby and then had it progress from there. And
exactly.
The implications of that are amazing.
Grow.
It can physically grow. It can obviously mentally grow because she's learning all the time, but the implications that are amazing. Once again, they don't go into any of that, but that is interesting.
This brings up a contradiction.
And why would you make a kid if you can make AI? I mean,
if she made this thing so that it could ultimately control all
tech,
tech or whatever.
If you had that ability, you could do that right away. Like
but it takes a long time to grow to that power. But then there is a scene where I don't know. This says one of kind. It can never be made again either. So it's like
which I'm
makes
not sure why. Yeah,
maybe
makes no sense.
I don't know if she took some of that with her to the grave. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, honestly, that's part of it. You don't have a good explanation for. You just gotta go along with the story.
Why wouldn't, if you have the ability to copy people's brains, like why wouldn't you, like, she's there? Why not just take her, download her consciousness and put her into her own body that looks like her so that she can actually continue her work? And
I think the idea with the Sims is that the transfer of consciousness isn't a permanent thing.
But every time they show it, it's because the person's already dead, but she's not dead. So it's like, so the implication is, she says, like, his brain's been dead for so long, that's why they only have 30 seconds. But that doesn't say that. It implies it implies that you could easily transfer the data. Like, why data doesn't, like, it's going to corrupt.
That opens up a whole new can of worms that we can't.
But what would cause that problem? Like, what would possibly, if you can copy that data doesn't degrade. Like, it's digital data. So what, like, you put in something else, like, you could say things like, oh, it would reject it, but that doesn't make any sense. It's not organic. Like, and yes, maybe like Shipley there would reject it, and he's talking about his wife and he's freaked out. Well, yeah, but if someone knew that was going to happen, then they wouldn't reject that. Certainly someone who, loved AI and was making it herself wouldn't reject it when she was put into it, because she's just like, okay, yeah, AI is fine. She doesn't reject it later on when she's a robot and she sees him at the end. There's no second where she's like, I'm a robot. She just,
I'm like saying,
so
once again, we kind of go back into
Yeah.
this whole thing of making them more human than they would be, because once they're turned off, they're dead, and but can they be turned off by a switch, or does it have to be?
Yeah.
How is that different? Is there a standby switch and an off switch?
And then once they're
which
off,
one you
like
choose?
how's a robot?
How do you accidentally not hit the off switch
exactly.
and it's toast forever?
And
Sorry.
a robot or a synth that gets turned off, like obviously you could just turn them back on again. Like there should be the very fact that they can download a human's brain and put it in the other one, like that, there'd be no problem with a robot or an AI. And if they're just like killing people off, like letting their compatriots die because they want to be more human, that's really dark and messed up in its own right, because they don't need to die. So you would be literally as a robot being like, I love that person, but they're kicking off because that's what humans do. Like that's really, like that's morally bankrupt and messed up too, because you wouldn't let, like, so it's like I said, they hinted these things where they put, and that's where the problem I have is, like, a lot of this seems like they'd be like, this would be a great visual, this looks really cool, and it did, but it changes the entire world, and that's the thing, it changes the entire world.
It does. I mean, I say I still enjoy it, and in spite of those things that I certainly can't explain.
I was gonna say I certainly enjoyed it. There's no, like I said, I enjoyed the film.
I think watching it each time, I'll kind of get something different out of it. Sometimes sometimes the character is more complex than you recognize at first, viewing. And I'll use an example. Probably a lot of people hate this film, that I don't. But Braveheart. The first time I saw Braveheart, I absolutely hated Robert the Bruce's character, but I like the movie, and it's a deeply flawed film.
The
so many
historical
levels.
version of Robert the Bruce is so much cooler than the film version of Robert the Bruce in that movie. But
but regardless, there's a lot of things I like about the film. I know it's controversial in of itself, but I'm bringing this up for a reason.
No, I mean, okay, first of all,
first time I hated Robert the Bruce. I thought, what a wuss, he betrayed William Wallace, but when I watched it again, I'm like, actually, this is a little more complex than I thought. This character is kind of tortured because he's having to choose between what he wants to do. He wants to go off and fight with William Wallace, but he also is in the position where he could be the next leader of Scotland, but he has to play his cards right. And he ends up having to betray what he wants to do and his friend to be able to achieve what's potentially greater good of Scotland, by putting himself in a position where he could actually be the next king of Scotland. And at least in the movie. And I mean, in reality, it's actually much more fascinating. It's actually a really cool story.
Like I said, the reality of Robert the Bruce is much better than
much better. I agree.
Which that's fine.
But I didn't know any of the history back then, and I've researched it a lot since then. But what I did find was, I thought that character became a lot more interesting when you consider the fact that he had to do what he didn't want to do himself for his country, and that makes that character
for the greater idea. It makes it more human. Right. You actually understand him.
So I'm like that where William Wallace was just kind of all, hey, I'm gonna fight this fight, and he didn't have this same thing, and it's even alluded to. And honestly, Randall Wallace does a lot of things I disagree with his writing, but anyway, I don't know why he does a lot of what he does, but. But he does say with the dad, he's like, you'd like to go fight too, you admire him. He has courage. So does a dog. It's exactly the ability to compromise that makes a man noble. And I'm like, what a BS line. But at the same time, it does kind of
true. Like you can't have
set the groundwork for why he does betray him.
And you can't have a working government of any type without compromise. It just doesn't work. You cannot, like if you want to have any type of government or any kind of governing body that isn't just a straight dictatorship, then compromise has to be part of it, or else it won't work.
And I think it says uncompromising men are easy to admire.
They are, and that's true, because we see that even in our world today. Like it's very easy to follow people that just say, this is what I believe, I won't change. But to actually to actually run things, you have to be willing to bend. The thing is, the people you should admire are people who can bring people over to their vision without being uncompromising. We're saying they don't compromise because they actually convince you they're right. Those are two different things.
And I don't,
So-
I haven't seen the movie enough times and, given enough consideration to certain aspects, but I suspect there might be more depth to Joshua's character when you really start to consider the
Well, like I said, once
implications
again,
too
I
of
don't
where he's
have
been.
problems with Joshua's character. That
But I think a lot of people
yeah.
do.
Oh yeah, and that I don't understand because there is depth to his character. They actually do have I mean, he has a character arc. You understand where he's coming from. They do a lot of like he emotionally changes. He does start off as bigoted against AIs because of the explosions, because of what happened to him, and then like what happened to Armada doesn't really change the whole thing with AIs because I'm sure like.
Well, and he has to go back and
Yeah.
forth because
Yeah, 'cause he's in a
in
world-
the very beginning,
Yeah.
he's back in his ordinary world, which we set
Oh, and he's
set
super-
up. But
yeah.
but he's going through. He sees an AI. He shuts it off. She's like, no, it seemed human. He's like, no, it's just
Yeah,
programming.
but when he
And-
says that, and I don't know about you, but when he says that, I don't believe it. Like, to me, that comes across about him coping because he's in a reality he doesn't want to be in, and he's trying to forget something.
he doesn't want
lost
that
his
job.
wife,
He said
and
he
he
take
doesn't
it.
want. He's trying to forget that world because he did make friends. That guy calls him brother. He was friends with some of those AI, and he obviously cared about them. He didn't instantaneously. It wasn't just his wife. Like when you have that whole hostage situation stuff, he's not instantly just grabbing the gun and like, not caring about the other things. Like he's worried about it. He asked them like what's going on, and it's not like they're the enemy. I mean, I just don't buy
It's
that. Like he
complicated,
had, at least for me, his character obviously didn't, was beginning to think of AI as something else. But when you had your entire world destroyed, and they dropped a bomb and killed all those AI, you're going to be doing
sometimes
everything
you have to tell
you're going to be
yourself
telling
certain
yourself
things,
that. Yeah. So when he tells her, oh no, they're just turning themselves off, that was more, I brought that as him trying to convince himself, not her. Like he's saying that, but it's him trying to tell himself that too.
I think there is a lot to the story and the development of the characters. There's more questions about the scientific merit of
Well,
whether
and
it's
any of
really
it, yeah,
sci-fi or
yeah.
whether it's just
Like,
future fantasy, and if it's future fantasy, then you can forgive a lot of this stuff and figure there's gotta
Exactly.
be a
But
good
once
reason
again,
behind these things.
for it to work though, even in just a fantasy film, you still have to be consistent within the world you're in and give some reasons for why it is. Like we discussed Star Wars the first time. Well, Star Wars doesn't really have anything in it. Like you just accept it, and there's all these things you have to accept about this. I mean, granted, Star Wars is basically a World War II space odyssey, which is great and it works, but there's not really a whole lot in there to challenge you to think like, because you just suspend your disbelief because it's obviously not reality.
It's a different world.
It even starts to saying this happened years
different-
ago, and they do everything they can to convince you this is not actual reality, so that you're not spending your time being like, well, why would this make sense? And
So
at
what
the
you're
time,
saying is what this story really needed was midi-chlorians.
midi-chlorians and rolling credits, and why is Nomad so dangerous? I think the people out there know why Nomad is so dangerous, because it has the high ground.
My son would love to use that. He uses that all the time.
Because you have that, and everybody knows that that's all that matters in a fight. Like especially your sword fighting, like you just want the high.
Especially when you fly up in the air and
no
your
one could
flips and
just
stuff.
no one could just cut out your legs because they're right in front of you. Like no, the high ground is all that matters. Like you want to be.
It did matter.
You want to be
didn't
way
it?
above. Like if you fight on stilts, you are the most dangerous person around.
Hey, it mattered.
It did.
They should have given up.
And like I said, once again, this is the highest praise I can give this movie. And it's not to be taken lightly because, like I said, the fact that it was seamless visually is huge because I've seen so many movies. You look at the Marvel movies, you look at all these movies that are literally touted because of their special effects. And you don't immerse yourself like this movie did. I was watching it and it just seemed like reality to me for that. Like there's all kinds of storyline issues that pulled me out of it, but the actual, like what it looked like, even though I don't, like even when they're showing those villages and the AI and that doesn't make sense to me, it still looks like it's fine. Like you still are like, these are robot villages.
I feel like
why they are, I don't know, but I completely accept that this is a village filled with
there
AI
are
robots.
very few films that I've seen in the theater and I immediately want to watch them again. And I almost went and watched this again before this, just because if I had a time, I would have, because I wanted to test my theory. But I have a feeling watching this multiple times, I'll see different things each time that I didn't see,
I think that's true.
at least for a while.
I think that's true.
Yeah. And that's rare, and that's unusual. And it's kind of like music. And what I mean is, we can all appreciate a pop song when it first comes out. It's easy to connect to because it's a simple boom, 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 thing that's catchy. But you get tired of it pretty quick.
Oh yeah, you'll start
and
to
it dies
hate it,
off.
yeah.
Where classical music is different. Classical music you may not appreciate the first couple times through because there's too much going on. You can't absorb it all.
Hear bits and pieces
but
of it. Yeah.
the more the more you listen to it, you start to hear all these different things, and you start to be able to follow different lines within that. Different instruments, different whatever, and like your appreciation grows over time rather than diminishing. And so I kind of think that this is one of those ones where there's too much for you to absorb it in one sitting. And I think you get more out of the next time and more out of the next time. And I'm not saying forever, but I'm saying that it's got more layers than something that you could grasp on the immediate first thing. And yes, there's a lot of questionable things like how could this be? But at the same time, I think that there's more depth to the story. And I think that's where it has real potential.
No, and I completely agree with you, because even though I'm the antagonist in this situation, talking about the problems I have with the film, and I still have all of those problems, when I watched it the second time, there were all kinds of things that I found in it that I hadn't seen the first time that were really cool. Some of them actually did fill plot holes that I had, discussed with you before. That was cool. But also there, like I said, visually, there's so many things even just to look at there. You notice things like little touches that they did that you didn't see the first time because you're focused on other things, and that itself would be worth rewatching it. So I think everybody, if you're going to watch it, you should see this film, and then you should probably watch it again when you have the chance. Maybe when it hits streaming or whatever. If you don't want to go back to the theater, that's fine. But it's definitely worth a rewatch. Even if you agree with me on the problems with the storyline, even if you agree with the problems with the world building, it's still worth rewatching. And I hope,
I'm still
for
thinking
that reason,
I'm still talking about it. We've had really long conversations about it. I still had a totally different conversation with Marc the other day about it. And so that is, for me, extremely rare, in any film, And so it's got us talking. My worry, and we still have things to say, is interesting.
I guess the biggest argument I have that this movie is deeply flawed is the simple fact that because of everything we've just said, it could have been another Star Wars. It could have been another Matrix. Those are two movies that at the time came out with, visual technology and, visual effects that no one had ever seen before, that blew people's minds. And they just exploded because of it, because the storylines worked in a way that everybody just wanted to see it instantly again and over, and just loved it and wanted to imitate it and go on.
You didn't find as many flaws.
Yeah, and even though they had flaws, but they weren't as glaring. Their storylines, like I said, there's much more character development. You understand who they are. And the Matrix is certainly an extremely complicated plot, where Star Wars is an extremely simple plot. And in Star Wars, you have more complex characters. In the Matrix, you have, but at the same time, both of those movies, they blew your mind the first time you saw it. And this is one of those movies where it kind of bummed me out, because it could have been that. Visually, it is that stunning, but it just lacks that other part.
I do have to say something, because, people do have complained that this is borrowing too heavily from Blade
we didn't discuss that. Well, and other things. Yeah.
And Apocalypse Now and others. To me, first off...
Apocalypse Now?
Yeah, he's a huge fan of Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, but
it had huge influence on this.
The Vietnam stuff I get, but at no point does the storyline even come close.
I don't know. I don't remember Apocalypse Now well enough to be able to. I'm just saying he specifically referenced that.
Yes, I mean in Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now, the whole point is he's going to kill that person because, he's supposed to find Kurtzman and kill him. And
I think it's more the reason that a lot of the Vietnam stuff is because of his inspiration, from Apocalypse Now.
Okay. Well, that does explain that.
So, and I think other Vietnam films as well.
Yes.
But the thing is, people will be like, "Oh, it's just a mashup of a bunch of these influences," and I'm like, "Well, what movie isn't really? You always draw. I mean, if you look at Star Wars, there's a lot of scenes in Star Wars that were directly from. In fact, they would even cut in archival footage of certain things or scenes from other movies when they were
and he literally
putting together until they had the shots there.
Yeah. And C-3PO and the other one are literally the characters stolen from a Japanese film. Now, granted, most people haven't seen that, but they're literally stolen from that film. George Lucas copied and pasted so much of that storyline and the people in it,
and
it still doesn't.
It's not necessarily ripping off. It's a lot of times paying homage.
It doesn't. So there is
fine line between the two.
There's another homage within this, even though he's doing the Star Wars. I mean, doing the Vietnam thing. Maybe that's because he loves Apocalypse Now, but there definitely is a Vietnam theme. But at one point when he's showing the soldiers, to me, I totally got the feeling that was an homage to Aliens. to James Cameron's Aliens because they're all talking that way. It's the same kind of goofiness, the same kind of thing with the soldiers. But then they even have that vehicle that one girl uses to defend, and it's obviously like supposed to look like Ripley. So it's like those kinds of things are okay. There's nothing wrong with doing that in a movie, and I don't detract. Like I don't think it detracted from. Yes, you could say things about the storyline in this movie that are not copies, but you could say that they're the same themes as other movies. But I can't really think of a movie that doesn't have that same thing going for it. I mean,
no, you can't.
There's very few
like I say, I guess maybe
storylines.
you're not making yours different enough from them that people can appreciate it. But I thought this is hilarious. I heard people say that this movie was too slow, that they didn't like the fact that this movie was too slow in the second act. But these are people who are, sci-fi buffs who say that they absolutely love Blade Runner. I'm like,
Blade Runner.
Wait, have you seen
Blade Runner? Is
because
extremely slow.
It's known for its plotting pace.
It's a slow burn. It is a slow burn.
You cannot say, I love Blade Runner, but this film was too slow. Because maybe there were a couple slow elements, or I think it's purposely slowed down to try to bring the pace down and try to, develop some characters or something, whether that worked for you or not.
I was going to say that might have been part of the problem.
Blade Runner, watch Blade Runner again and see if you can stay awake through the whole thing. I mean, I really like Blade Runner.
I can stay awake through the whole thing. Just to say, I do like Blade Runner.
Me too, but it can be challenging.
Well, and to bring this around full circle to what I was talking about earlier, you look at this film and it's just like, if you can imagine a movie like Blade Runner with the visual technology that these people were able to create in this film. It's like I said, this surpasses so many other films I've seen in terms of what they can do with visual effects. If you can imagine Blade Runner with that kind of an actual backdrop.
Yeah,
and
they had a chance to do that with Blade Runner 2049 or whatever.
Well, and they did, but and granted, it wasn't.
It's also slow.
Bad. I mean, I enjoyed it. But yeah, once again, I didn't feel like with like a Star Wars or the Matrix, I didn't feel the need to just keep rewatching it or really.
But there's a reason that Blade Runner basically, bombed at the office. At the box office. Because it's not going to appeal to broad audiences.
Yeah,
it is
a geek film for sure. Like
it built up its following over time, and eventually made its money back, but it took a long time.
And a lot of the things with Blade Runner is it's a thinking film. Like the more you expand on what's happening with the characters in it, and you talk about Easter eggs, the whole idea of whether or not he's an actual robot himself comes up, and that even was answered that yes, he actually was, like way down the line. But I mean, you have all of that in that, and it's just like the problem I have is that you watch a Blade Runner. Yeah, granted, I think this movie was more exciting than Blade Runner, but at the same time, Blade Runner once again doesn't have so many story flaws. There's not so many things where you're trying to question. It tries to answer.
They weren't trying to change as much either.
Well, and a lot of it was them, but a lot of them was them expanding on it. The questions we keep on asking about AI, they actually try to answer in Blade Runner, at least give you reasons for it. And it doesn't take very long. Like a lot of times they'll only have, like for character development, they'll say like this AI, and it's quick, but this movie has time. And I think that's kind of the plotting thing, is it has time to explain things, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
It has times to expand Alfie's character, to give her all kinds of depth, to actually give her emotions.
I would like to know a lot more about that character.
Who is she? What is she learning? What's she doing? Like, what's going on? She never does that. And then there's things like she'll be able to do things that, like, she'll notice when those planes are incoming to bomb them. She'll be like, my friends are here. Like, well, how did she know that? Like, she can't see outside the building, but she just knows that. So it's like sometimes they hint that she could do so much more, but really all she does is, like, literally, I mean, I was joking, but it really is just the I Dream of Jeannie thing. She does a Buddhist thing together, and it's an EMP burst every single time. Like, that's,
I think
except for the robot that
I think you could explain that being
that
she's still learning. She's got some of these abilities.
That's true, you could explain that, but once again, well, and it brings up the whole thing, like, why would, if you were a mother and you're creating an AI and you created it to look like your daughter, would you make it a weapon that's gonna, like,
well, and I started to say something about this before. Ken Watanabe's character says, basically,
she's not ready. That she's supposed to be able to just take down Nomad without having to destroy herself. And
so somebody asked her, well, how would anybody survive that? Because she'd have to go up there at this point. And he's like, they wouldn't, but that's what she was designed to do. It's like, well, but was she supposed to now? Was she always supposed to die? I don't think the mom created her
we're going to have to send her up there. One of the major plot points is that these guys don't have the ability to take down Nomad. But if you can send her up there, then you can take down Nomad, because all you have to do is hit it with an explosive, which is not hard. And it's like they keep on saying, like, it's supposed to be that they can't attack Nomad. But then he says, we need to send her up there, which means he knows they have the capability to do so, which means they have the capability to hit Nomad. So, like, what do they need to... Why throw a little girl in a machine when you can have a monkey explode it by pressing a button?
Yeah.
We skipped over that part.
Yeah. I think there's more to it than that, but
But I mean, but it makes you wonder. It's like
yeah,
they obviously have the capabilities to hit this
yeah,
thing,
and
and
they've already
all
got
she does when she goes to explode it, she gets in the middle and does an EMP burst. Like once again, like it doesn't seem to have any defenses. At no point is there like weapons or anything on the outside of it. Like you really just have to hit it with something, and like. And you could do the classic terrorist thing. I hate to go this way. Like they're not supposed to be terrorists. I mean, they call them terrorists, but like they have lunar planes that fly past this thing. Like all you have to do is hop a flight, get your box cutter, go into the thing, and you can ram it into like Nomad. Like it's just I don't know. Like I said, the
yeah,
problem I
yeah,
have
yeah.
is like I have a problem with storylines that the more I think of it, the more flaws I have. Like you mentioned Braveheart. I love Braveheart when it came out. I still think it's a good film to watch and enjoy. But the second you know anything about history, you start like being like, what the heck?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like history destroys it, but it's not the film
Oh,
itself where the plot lines are the problem. But the second you actually know anything about history, you're just like,
I mean,
what
they
are they
could have
doing? What are they doing?
they could have fixed a bunch of
Yeah, they
things.
could, and they could have made
Simply.
it like there's the reality is cool. But then again, this is the funny thing though. They have made multiple stories, movies recently that are about Robert the Bruce, and
They're all terrible.
none of them are as good as Braveheart. I want to like Braveheart has all of these problems, and yet Braveheart is still the best movie with Robert the Bruce. How is that possible?
How could you find such a fascinating character like Robert the Bruce and make him so boring, like Outlaw King? I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Exactly.
It's like, could you? Like, we're historically accurate. And I'm like, yeah, and it's extremely boring.
But then again, but then you
Your
actually,
telling
but
was
then if you
terrible.
look at it, they still aren't even historically accurate.
No.
So it's really frustrating to have something that has that source material and then have the best film with it be one that completely throws it away. But now we're going off a tangent. But I mean, I do find that funny that the best film with Robert the Bruce is the one that treats him the worst historically.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, granted, he's horrible in it, but the film is much more fun to watch than anything that came after it. So. In terms of that story.
I agree with you, and it's.
But once again, this goes to if you have a good storyline, and you have like good elements like action and stuff like that, you can really make a good movie that people enjoy, even if everything about it is bollocks. And that kind of is a Braveheart thing. And that's kind of I never fell into this movie like I did into Braveheart, and I find flaws with it afterwards. But
I recommend to writers, if you know that your stuff doesn't make sense. Or is it just complete fabrication? Isn't there a way of kind of
try
addressing some of those things
if
and not just
if there's any aspiring writers or current writers or filmmakers in general, do better by history. Like honestly, people learn so much about history from films that when you do something like they did with Braveheart, people take that as that's what actually happened. And it's okay with some films, but honestly, like when people are getting their knowledge of history from movies, you can do real damage to the world when people are viewing things through that lens that's complete nonsense because they take that as what actually happened. And like I said, Braveheart's not a huge deal, but there are many other modern movies with modern themes to where they've just butchered history. If you're going to use a historical event, there's no reason not to be true to it to the best of your ability. If you don't want to be, then just don't film the historical event. You can do things like, obviously, if there's one thing the creator showed is that you can do anything, your imagination. I mean, like I said, that showed that you were at a point, technologically speaking, with computer graphics, that you could do anything and make it look real. And that, like, once again, that is mind-blowing to me. You can take any story that you fantasized as a kid about seeing on the screen. This movie showed that you have the point of doing that and making it look realistic. And with those tools, like, oh my gosh, like, let's get some really good storylines and get those things out there. Like, I mean, Disney's not going to do it, but...
Yeah, well, so I think
so that would be my takeaway from this film is I had problems with the film, but yes, you should watch the film, and I hope
twice.
Yeah, well, you should watch it multiple times. But if you're going to theater, you don't have to watch it multiple times in the theater. Watch it in the theater, but when it comes out on streaming, when it comes out available to where you can watch it again, and actually see if you agree with us on any of these points and go through and actually analyze this for yourself. Maybe you'll think we're a bunch of idiots. You can put that in the comments. That's fine. Do it. But at the same time, you should definitely take a deep dive into the film because I have to agree with you, and I wasn't thinking about it from this angle, that even though I had all these problems with the film, I've spent hours talking about it. And there's films that, like I said, there's Marvel films and stuff. I would never do this with them. It would never make me think this much because there's nothing there. It's fluff. And even if you think there's story problems like I do, there's at least the beginnings of plot points and stuff that will blow your mind. And that's worth watching. So yeah, do that.
And it doesn't delve into, but it does bring up a lot of questions.
Well, that's the thing. Its world alone brings up so many interesting ideas, even if they didn't mean to, that you can expand on that is worth watching it just for that. Yeah. And it's, once again, visually it's just amazing. You watch it and it's just seamless. And a lot of that has to do with shooting on actual locations. But that's my hope for this film is A, I hope it makes enough money to where it's at least a success so that people start looking at the filmmaking techniques, start looking at what they're able to do and start using this as a baseline to do their own things because that would be good. And so I really do. I hope last time I was looking, it was struggling at the box office. But the box office
it's going
is not
slow, you know.
Yeah,
but
the box office isn't what it used to be. For a film also to be successful now, it has to be the thing that captures people. There is no mediocre films that make money anymore because the box office just people don't go to the movies anymore.
But you know, maybe people will go back and see this a second time.
I think they should. I think people should.
And maybe some people will go to see it because they
Yeah.
have other people talking about it.
Well, and
they're
if
like,
you
okay, I need to see what
if you
this is all
saw it
about.
before and you found anything that you enjoyed about it, then you should watch it again because both Heath and I, when we watched it again, it was a completely different experience. Like there were things in
better.
there. There were things. Oh, it was definitely better. There were things in there. There were plot holes that I found out weren't plot holes. There were character development that I didn't realize because it was so subtle the first time I watched it. I was looking like ooh shiny explosion or whatever, and I missed that one line of dialogue.
Or you didn't,
Granted,
recognize that character that you saw earlier actually
was
is the same character later
and
on.
there should have, yes, granted, the movie should have done a better job of making that obvious and actually having that flow. But at the same time, there are things that you catch that do make it, do explain it better.
It wasn't a film that spoon-fed you, that's for sure.
No, like even when I was talking about earlier, when you have that stripper in the place he's getting to, that's parts like machine, it registers to you that he's viewing that as distasteful, but it doesn't really register what that means or what that means for the world. And I would have liked to see, of course, more of that with people augmenting themselves and show that.
Or
but there is
the
a
irony
there.
that he's also augmented in different ways.
But it also explains like why. But it also
maybe
explains,
he hates that aspect of himself too. Who knows? I don't know.
Well,
No
but
idea.
it also explains, once again, it goes back to what we were talking about with why he has to attach the limbs to himself.
Yeah.
Like they very much see robotics and computers as foreign, and they don't want to have that as part of themselves. The idea that you can remove it, but it's still functional is okay. Whereas if you're actually making it a part of you, you're embracing it in a way that, like Americans in this. And I honestly, I also
you driving it versus it.
Yeah, and I wish they would have just expanded on America a bit too. You see a military side to it, and you see pictures of Los Angeles, but you never get a feel for what it actually means to be an American in this world. Like they are literally in, I mean, for not a better term, a jihad against AI. Like that's what it is. They are against AI, like wiping it out. They never talk about we need to beat these guys down so that we can do it. Every single moment that's treated from it for the military or the American perspective is it's us or them. We have to kill every single one of them.
And they believe that AI is going to destroy us. And some people believe that now.
Well, and that's true, and it will. But the reasons for it, like we can get into the whole thing, but the reasons for it are different because like it will. Like if you think that our world 100 years from now is going to be anything like it is now, anything at all. And I'm not just talking about environmental destruction, all of that kind of stuff, but I mean, just technologically speaking, with what AI brings to us, it will destroy us for what we think of ourselves as now. And that's true for most technology, but it's going to be more than that.
And it's going to change everything.
It's going to be more than that. Like cell phones change. I mean, just cell phones themselves completely changed what we were. You could easily say that cell phones destroyed humanity for what it was at the time when they became a thing. And smartphones, same thing, because they literally changed how we think. They changed how we interact. They changed everything. And
the internet and the access to unlimited information.
And what AI will be able to do will be that, hundreds of times over, because what it can bring to the world, what it will enable, what it's already doing is so far beyond anything that we've experienced before for changes for ourselves that 100 years from now, if you were to look back here, it will destroy us. What we have right at this moment will not look anything like that because it's changing. The thing that's changing about AI is it's changing things fundamentally that no technology has ever changed about humans before. And that's the thing that's different. Is like you couldn't, if you're in the 60s and you're imagining the future, you can guess technology changing how we do things, like how we farm, how we go about our lives. But nobody in the 60s would guess that artwork would be the thing that's threatened by AI. No one would think that AIs could be writing scripts. No one would think these are all things that would be logical if you think about having robots that think, but no one went down that path or even saw it. And that's the thing, the fundamental things, the things that we think of ourselves as being truly human, that's the things that AI threatens, and that's why people are scared of it, and they should be. Because if it's done wrong, it really could be apocalyptic. If it's done right, it'll definitely change the evolutionary path of humans, but it doesn't mean that's necessarily a bad thing. It could be a very good thing.
So, yeah. Okay, I think that's probably a good stopping
I think so.
point.
We'll end on just that little, like that tiny little, because it's not.
If you found this interesting, please like and subscribe. Hopefully, if you're 2
hung in there
hours
through the
into
whole
this
thing,
or 3 hours into this, you are still listening, you probably have already subscribed or liked or something.
And hit the bell for notifications. as well. Yeah,
Check out cinematechnica.com. It's actually
absolutely.
beneficial to you to actually subscribe to my mailing list there, because we will be doing other stuff in the future and probably giveaways and that sort of thing. And I don't have a way of contacting you just because you subscribe to the YouTube channel, but if you do subscribe to the website, then I do have a way of contacting you, letting you know about things and entering you into contests and stuff if you want to do that sort of thing. So anyway.
And please leave comments, because we went over a ton of
Yes.
stuff here, and I'm sure there's people that will disagree with us, and you should, because that's your right. And there's tons of stuff in that film that you can go either way on. So please leave copious amounts of comments and tell us what kind of crazy people we are, if we're horrible or if we're idiots. That's fine. Go ahead.
All right, thanks a lot.